Chapter 656. Swoosh. Yin Yang's palm landed on Jilingxi's chest. The touch of his palm, he felt just a little boom. A beam of red light flashed as expected. A certain someone who had been full of confidence, due to his improved cultivation base, was flung away like a kite with a broken string. Boom, boom, boom. A certain someone broke 2 flowering trees in succession, before he fell onto the courtyard wall with a loud bang. Looking over, a certain someone's mouth and eyes were already crooked, and blood was flowing out of his 7 orifices. His 4 limbs were stuck to the wall like an octopus. After a while he slid down with a schwa sound. His condition was so miserable that one could not bear to look at it. Shangguan Lingxiu cried out involuntarily when she saw what had happened. Jilingxi, on the other hand, looked dejected and sad. It's still not enough. My ability is still far from enough. On the other side, Yun Yang struggled with all his might and raised his head with a lingering breath. He said angrily, You, what do you mean by this? Only then did his head tilt as he fainted. Poor me, how long have I just woken up? I was only in high spirits for such a short while. Yun Yang had thought about what he would do after he woke up from his advancement this time. How he would do it, for example, charging to Sir Bai's side and catching him off guard. The 9th heaven realm and the 3rd heaven of Dao realm were 2 entirely different things. They were 2 entirely different concepts, especially to Yun Yang, who possessed the ability to kill someone of a higher level. After all, Sir Bai had long had an idea of Yun Yang's ability. The intelligence that Yun Yang was currently only at 9th heaven realm, and he had been holding on with all his might while being surrounded by so many assassins. Such a bloody fact was enough to dispel anyone's doubts. If he were to transform into a 3rd heaven realm cultivator at this point in time, he would be able to achieve twice the result with half the effort. It would be the most conservative estimate. Just thinking about it was exhilarating. It was as exhilarating as one could imagine. When a certain someone wanted to be in high spirits, he had even wondered if he could fight Ling Xiaozui and the others with his current ability. However, with his current advancement in cultivation base, he should be able to stun the few old monsters' jaws off no matter what. This was something to be expected. After all, they had only seen him a few days ago. It had only been a few days since then. Have you old geezers ever seen such a drastic change like this before? It would have blinded your eyes. Perhaps he could even flaunt his prowess in front of the 4 young masters? Give Feng Mafei and Lao Mei a scare? Yin Yang had thought through everything that he had just mentioned. There was still a lot more, such as showing off to Yun Xiaoyao, showing off to the Emperor of Yutong, then helping Qiu Jianhan and the other 2 rogues, as well as old Mistress Shangguan to demonstrate his worth. There was really nothing that he had not thought of. However, he had never imagined that he would be severely injured by Jilingxi's red beam, just as he was about to shine and be admired by others. He would then have to lie back on the bed. This was not going according to the script. What happened to the promise of going out to show off and slap their faces after advancing? Am I still the main character? I didn't even think about molesting you. What the F***ck? Especially since it was Jilingxi, that girl, who had forcefully used that thing of hers to tease my palm. In the end, it was also my fault. The last of Yin Yang's consciousness stopped here. He was filled with indignation. Even if he had to defeat Jilingxi first, it would have been fine. Looking at Yin Yang coming out to spar with confidence, and then being sent flying so easily, the 2 ladies were speechless. Jilingxi's face was filled with frustration as she screamed hysterically, it still doesn't work. Shangguan Lingxiu sighed, countless feelings welling up in her heart. Heartache, realization, understanding, and a hint of delight. Jilingxi had not lied to him. This was simply, it had to be said that to Shangguan Lingxiu. This was the best news that she had ever heard. Everything was very clear to him. If it were not for this, if Jilingxi did not have such a magical seal on her, she would never have given Yin Yang any hope, even if she was beaten to death. According to Jilingxi's personality and temper, she would never have given Yun Yang any chance. This was the expected outcome. No woman would be truly generous in such matters. However, the reality was now, no matter how reluctant Jilingxi was, No matter how reluctant she was, she had to give Yin-yang a chance, even begging her to join the fray. There were 3 ways to be unfilial, the worst being to have no descendants. Even if Ji Lingxi was a fairy who had descended from the heavens, even if her man loved her so dearly that he did not care about anything else, he could not even hug her for the rest of his life. How could he even talk about carrying on the family line? How could he even talk about harmony? What else could he say? Unless both of them were truly in love with each other, one would be a saintess, and the other a eunuch for the rest of their lives. How could there be such logic? Perhaps there were such infatuated people in this world, but it would never be Ji Lingxi and Yin-yang, and it was even more unsuitable for their situation. Especially when the situation was almost unsolvable. Who was Yin-yang now? He had broken through to the Dao realm, and ascended to become one of the few legendary experts in the continent. However, he still had no way of fighting back against the red light. How far must he cultivate to be able to resist and break through this red light? Even if it was not hopeless, it was extremely difficult. Do you think that a martial artist's advancement is like eating rice? There are many people who are stuck at the first level and never make any progress for the rest of their lives. This continent is full of them. Of course, you can say that there's hope as long as you're alive. Perhaps you can wait for the day Yin-yang breaks through to be able to fight the red light. Or perhaps Yin-yang can wait for you, for the day the red light acknowledges Yin-yang. However, who knows when the day will come? Perhaps it will be 10 years later, 20 years later, or even 60 years later. If it's really a long time later, when both of you are in your 70s or 80s, even if your wish is fulfilled, can you still do it? This is not an impossibility, it's a highly probable situation. Shangguan Lingxiu heaved a long sigh, feeling at ease. She was like a general who had everything under control, and was devising strategies. Ji Lingxi, on the other hand, heaved a deep sigh, as if she was not happy that she had the ability to injure a Dao realm cultivator at any time. Chapter 657. Ji Lingxi, on the other hand, was deeply dejected. After all, Yin-yang's advancement this time was not only to prove it to Shangguan Lingxiu, but to Ji Lingxi as well. After all, Yin-yang's advancement this time was very significant. His cultivation base was already on par with hers. If he could suppress the red light, it would be worth it even if she was slightly injured from this strike. As long as the red light was no longer as overbearing, Yin-yang would still have to be given some chances to taste some sweetness, even though he could not do that directly or hug too frequently, as long as the red light was no longer as strong. Now, however, the cruel reality had shattered the last bit of charm that belonged to a young girl in Ji Lingxi's heart. What was left was the urge to point at the sky and curse with clenched teeth. Just what kind of immoral old thing did he set up this kind of restriction on me? Why don't you King set such a restriction on your own wife? What a bastard. Did I offend you? He couldn't even talk about a relationship anymore. What should I do in the future? She and Yin-yang were in love with each other. Yet it was like this. Ji Lingxi guessed that if she were to tell Yin-yang that she liked him right now, then, Yin-yang shuddered. Then he would turn and flee. Was this how one would talk about love? This kind of mental activity would take a long time to describe. But in reality, it only took the blink of an eye to complete. Yin-yang was flung away and collapsed unconscious. The 2 girls were stunned for a moment before they sprinted over and carried Yin-yang into the room. They placed him on the bed and fed him water and medicine, taking good care of him. Poor Yin-yang had only left this bed for less than 2 hours, but he was already lying on it again, barely breathing. The tragedy was indescribable. When Yin-yang woke up, he saw Shangguan Lingxiu looking at him worriedly while beside her. Ji Lingxi was sneaking glances at him with an apologetic and embarrassed expression. Sigh. The first thing Yin-yang did when he woke up was to let out a long sigh. This sigh simply caused those who heard it to be sad, those who heard it to shed tears, and it was tragic to the point it caused others to doubt their lives. "Oh Lingxi, sister, lady, ancestor." Yin-yang covered his forehead with a hand and said weakly, "What are you doing now?" She lowered her head, as if she had committed a heinous crime. Her voice was as soft as a mosquito's buzz. "I'm sorry." Yin-yang heaved another long sigh. Sorry, Eighth brother, you left me such a good sister. Well, it doesn't matter if you don't call me brother. If it doesn't work, you can call me hubby. I can accept it if I marry you. In fact, I quite like it. But do you know how many apologies I will receive in this life, whether I marry her or not? Do you know that I need to lie in bed for at least 3 days just because I'm sorry? You know, the bitterness in Yin Yang's heart was difficult to express, so he could only heave a long sigh. What a tragedy! It seemed that in all the creation of Xianqi in the world, there had never been such a thing. If this matter were to be spread out, he did not know how he would be ridiculed. One day in the future, Supreme Cloud had become a legend. Thus, stories of a certain person and strange things about him swept the martial world. Hey, do you know about Supreme Cloud? Supreme Cloud of the 9 Supremes? Nonsense, who doesn't know about him? He's called the 9 Supremes think tank. Then you must know that Supreme Cloud is married. Of course, isn't he marrying Supreme Wind's biological sister? What secret is this? Look at how secretive you are. But do you know that Supreme Cloud has lain down again? Lain down? And again? What happened? You don't know, do you? Come, sit down. Let me tell you in detail. Do you know? A kiss? Lie down for 3 days. Do you know? A hug? Lie down for 3 days. Do you know? Lie down on the same bed for 3 days. What? Zhou Gong? The thing between husband and wife, that doesn't exist. Some years later, Supreme Cloud passed away. Thus, do you know? Our Lord Supreme Cloud was still a virgin when he passed away. Hiss! How is this possible? Isn't Lord Supreme Cloud's wife? I know you don't know. Lord Supreme Cloud is really the kind of person who died a hard death, according to legend. Come, sit down. Let me tell you in detail. Thinking about it, Yun Yang felt as if the sky had darkened and his heart had died. He wanted to cry but no tears came out. I've already created a legend. Don't tell me. I have to create another legend. I'm suffering. Yun Yang was suffering. Jilingxi was suffering too. It could even be said that Jilingxi was suffering more than Yun Yang. 100 times worse. Tears were already welling up in her eyes now. Why is my life so bitter? It's fine that you gave birth to me but didn't raise me. Why are you doing this? Lingxi, don't be sad. You still have me, don't you? I'll do my best to help you. Shengguan Lingxiu hugged Jilingxi's shoulders and said softly, I think that the seal will disappear one day. Maybe when your cultivation base breaks through again. Or when you find the person who set it up. Don't give up hope. Jilingxi sobbed. What if we can't find him? As long as you don't give up, you'll definitely find him. Shengguan Lingxiu said confidently. Jilingxi choked on her sobs. Yun Yang was initially unromantic. The window between her and Yun Yang had not been opened, so it was fine. Now, however, both of them had understood each other's feelings, and were even vaguely willing to accept each other. It was already within their expectations to see Yun Yang succeed. Yet, a problem had arisen at what should have been the sweetest moment. It was a deadlock that could not be resolved or reconciled. To Jilingxi, it was the cruelest of all. The man she loved with her life. The man she loved with everything she had. Yet he did not even have the right to be close to her. Was there anything more ridiculous and indescribable than this in this world? Yun Yang knew that Jilingxi was upset as well, so he comforted her gently. Don't worry. The seal on you is strong, but it's set up with a strong cultivation base. With our current cultivation base advancement, we might be able to undo it in a few years. We can still. Yun Yang stopped talking abruptly. That's right, how could he continue? What else could he do then? Yun Yang's mouth was agape, stunned and speechless. In fact, he was not the only one. Shengguan Lingxiu and Jilingxi blushed as well. Pervert. Jilingxi's face was still wet with tears, but they had turned crimson from shyness. She was alluring and captivating, causing one's imagination to run wild. Shut up. What nonsense are you spouting? However, he sighed in his heart. Yun Yang was right, but judging from the strength of the seal, it might not be possible even if she were to break through another dozen levels. Besides, how long would it take to achieve those dozen levels? If she could maintain the progress of breaking through just by dreaming and sleeping, perhaps it would not take more than a few days. However, the seal was imposed on her. it would be difficult to undo it herself. Another way to solve it was to count on Yun Yang. However, Yun Yang did not have what she had. A dozen levels would take 10 years, 20 years, 30 to 50 years, or even half a lifetime. The higher her cultivation base, the more difficult it would be for Yun Yang to undo the seal. The young lady's heart was torn. As she thought about it, she almost cried again. Chapter 658. Although Shangguan Lingxiu was reluctant to leave, she still chose to stand up and bid her farewell. The problem now was neither Yun Yang nor herself. The crux of the matter was Jilingxi. Encountering such an incident, if she were to act recklessly, it would be unavoidable that she would regret it for the rest of her life. Before she left, she winked at Yun Yang, indicating for him to comfort him. Only then did she leave with a heavy heart, no longer feeling the joy she had before. Yun Yang sent Fang Mafei and the others to escort Shangguan Lingxiu away. Shangguan Lingxiu's brows were already locked in a frown as she walked, recalling the day's events. There was still a tinge of happiness in Shangguan Lingxiu's heart, because Yun Yang did have feelings for her, and Jilingxi had made a great concession, making things very clear. It could be said that as long as she let go of the burden on her shoulders, she could achieve good things at any time. In spite of this, feeling happy and blissful was one thing. Once she thought of Jilingxi's situation, she could not help sighing and frowning. What should she do? How could such an inconceivable thing exist in this world? Was it not a little too bizarre? Shangguan Lingxiu had been thinking along the way back, wondering how she should resolve the matter appropriately. Shangguan Lingxiu could actually foresee that if this matter was not resolved, even if she eventually married Yun Yang and fulfilled her wish, it would be difficult for everyone to be truly happy in the days to come, not just for Jilingxi, but also for herself and Yun Yang. As long as this matter was not resolved, it would be difficult for everyone to be truly happy. It must be resolved. Shangguan Lingxiu thought, lost in thought. Even if it's resolved now and Jilingxi rejects me again, this matter must still be the first priority. Yun Yang laid in an absolutely miserable position for a day and a half before he finally recovered. During this period of time, Yun Yang's state of mind could only be described with one word: burning with impatience. He had been delayed for 2 whole days and 1 whole night. The assassins had failed to assassinate him mainly because they were not prepared. But after the leader of the masked men returned, and Sir Bai reflected on his failure, how could he not be prepared? Initially, his breakthrough in his cultivation base, and the unexpected recovery of his injuries, had been a pleasant surprise, giving him an additional bargaining chip. However, what Jilingxi had done had nullified the pleasant surprise that he had gained from the unexpected advantage he had gained. After all, it had been a long time since he was besieged. According to Yun Yang's assessment of Sir Bai, there must be a corresponding response. Whether he had escaped, gone into hiding, or had other countermeasures, it would only complicate the situation that was already clear. However, who could he blame for this? Jilingxi and the red glow on her body? It seemed like he could be blamed, but if he had not wanted to show off because his cultivation base had improved, would he have been retaliated against if he had not wanted to show off in front of the masses and show off? Forget it, this is fate. I have no choice but to face it, and face it positively. Just as Yun Yang got up and walked out, he saw Jilingxi, heaving a soft sigh of relief on the other side. He muttered to himself, "A day and a half too early." "What do you mean by a day and a half early?" Yun Yang asked in surprise. It's nothing. You heard wrong." Jilingxi's gaze was evasive. She only glanced at him once before she scampered away like a frightened rabbit. Yun Yang could vaguely see that the girl's eyes were red and swollen. Her face was flushed, almost to the point of her neck. Yun Yang watched Jilingxi's fleeing silhouette in a daze. After a long time he sighed. "One day," Yun Yang said quietly. When he spoke up to hear, he didn't continue speaking. He casually waved his hand, and a purple robe suddenly appeared on his body. When he walked out of the room, his aura turned icy cold and ghastly. It was as if a devil god had descended into the world. It was bone-piercingly cold, and it caused others to tremble with fear. "Those assassins are not dead yet, are they?" "Not yet, they're alive and well." To the secret chamber. Fang Mafei and Lao Mei shuddered in unison upon hearing the words to the secret chamber. How could they not know that the assassin's good days had come? Yun Yang's interrogation method could only be described with one word: unparalleled in this world. This young man who looked clean and refreshed from head to toe. His face was gentle and refined, exuding an air of elegance and nobility. However, as he walked into the place where the assassins were imprisoned, the place became scarier than the underworld to the assassins. The door to the secret chamber, that was as thick as a city wall, slowly closed. Shangguan Lingxiu rushed over, only to see Ji Lingxi staring at Yun Yang's silhouette, disappearing into the secret chamber. Somehow, the only thing Shangguan Lingxiu felt was that Yun Yang's silhouette was filled with an extremely oppressive aura that was extremely intimidating. Once Yun Yang entered, it took him 8 whole hours to do so. When he came out again, it was already evening, when the sun was about to set. Looking over, Yun Yang looked as usual, his purple robe still clean. He walked out calmly, like a young master who had just returned from an outing, looking indescribably carefree. As for Fang Mafei and Lao Mei, who were following behind Yun Yang, their appearances and auras were similar. They were both pale, their usually tall and sturdy bodies trembling slightly, their hair drenched in sweat, and the corners of their eyes and brows filled with unconcealable fear. Throughout the day of interrogation, Fang Mafei and Lao Mei had only assisted from the side. In fact, most of the time, it was only Yun Yang who was in charge of the interrogation, while the two of them were outside. Even Lao Mei, who had participated the most, had only accompanied Yun Yang in interrogating one of the assassins. This time, however, Lao Mei and Fang Mafei felt that they had finally witnessed what was meant by interrogation by torture. Honestly, Yun Yang's interrogation method was not fancy, nor was it complicated. There was no stunning, unique technique. Throughout the entire process, everything seemed very ordinary. The only unusual thing about him was the continuous progress. Also, his face seemed to have an eternally calm and indifferent expression. It was fine if he did not speak. Continue. Torment him to death. Then rescue him. Then ask him if he did not speak. Not speak. Alright, continue. Then the next one. Not speak. It's alright, I'll just watch. This elder brother has patience. I'll let all of you cheer each other up. Let all of you hurl insults. Let all of you curse. Let all of you torture and interrogate again and again, over and over again. I didn't even interrogate them separately, gathering all the assassin captives together right from the start. Together. I'm not afraid of your collusion, you're welcome to try. As long as you have the confidence to hide it from me, a single person might be able to withstand a test of death, because in most cases, a single death would be the end of 100. However, to fall into Yun Yang's hands, especially when Emmy had returned, death would be the end of everything. It was a joke. You want to die? No problem. I'll let you go through the endless cycle from life to death, no problem at all. Chapter 659. Each and every one of them was an experienced martial world expert, a top-notch assassin who viewed death as a return home. It was true that they did not regard life and death as a trivial matter. However, under Yun Yang's hands, they had slowly gone from gritting their teeth to cursing loudly, to cursing viciously, to moaning in agony, to spasms and spasms, to being unable to utter a single word. Then, the cycle repeated until they begged for mercy and begged for mercy. He crawled on the ground like a dog, automatically shaking out all 8 generations of his ancestors. There was even a fellow who had accidentally said a word of his ancestor's name wrongly when he was confessing, and had to go through the process of life and death once more. Even Fang Mafei and Lao Mei felt that under such circumstances, if the information obtained could still be false, then the entire world could only be an illusion. The Four Seasons Tower's influence in the Empire of Yutong has finally reached its head and gotten a clue. Yun Yang was deep in thought, a cold glint glinting in his eyes. After such a long time, the battle of wits and courage for more than 2 years, and the recent rebellion of the Snow, Frost, and Sword, the attacks from all sides, from the imperial court to the martial world, and the alliance of experts like Ling Xiaozui, Heaven's Inquisition and Dugachou, The assassin organizations in the martial world had been muddled, suffering heavy casualties. The entire martial world had become a piece of porridge, and 5 out of the 5 empires had almost been destroyed. It was at this moment that the Four Seasons Tower's base in the Empire of Yutong was truly touched. The most crucial figures of the Four Seasons Tower at the current stage were 2 people, Sir Bai and Wu Ying. As long as these 2 people and the forces under them were uprooted, the Empire of Yutong could be considered to be completely at peace. Yun Yang had a fairly good grasp of Sir Bai's arrangements and some of Wu Ying's materials. However, Wu Ying's cautiousness was still beyond Yun Yang's expectations. The assassins he had captured this time only knew that there was such a person on Wu Ying's side. They did not even know his name, identity, or any other details about him. How can I focus on other things and eradicate him in one fell swoop? Yun Yang contemplated seriously, planning his troops and setting up his formation, but he realized that it was too difficult, or perhaps beyond his capabilities. Since it's beyond my capabilities, don't insist on fighting both sides. Focus your energy on one side first, then think about the rest after defeating either side. As for the other side, just keep a close eye on him. I don't believe that he can escape from this inescapable net. Yin Yang quickly made up his mind. Hesitation was the biggest taboo in such matters. Since he couldn't take care of both sides, he would take care of one side first. If he continued to hesitate, it would be hard to avoid alerting the enemy, and both sides would fail. However, on the day when he was about to act against the core of the Four Seasons Tower in the Empire of Yutong, Yin Yang suddenly had a feeling. Easy. Yin Yang was puzzled by this peculiar feeling. During this process, he clearly experienced untold hardships and countless narrow escapes. It could be said to be hair-raising. But why did he think that it was easy at the last moment? Isn't this too inconceivable? If it had been slightly more difficult, I'm afraid that my soul would have long dispersed. Tonight, after midnight, we will begin the operation. Late at night, in Sir Bai's residence, in the study, a chessboard was filled with black and white pieces. Both sides were engaged in a fierce battle. Sir Bai stared at the chessboard, a black piece in his hand. His brows were locked in a frown as he pondered, unable to make a move. I can't go anywhere. There's no way out in all directions. I can't do anything even if I force myself to. There's no way to fight back. What should we do? His lean face was filled with contemplation and worry. At this moment, the silhouette of a person suddenly swayed, and there were suddenly 3 more people beside him. 3 people who looked exactly the same. To be more precise, there were 4 people who looked exactly the same. The 3 people who had appeared out of nowhere were exactly the same as Sir Bai. Just by looking at their faces and bodies, they were almost exactly the same. There was no difference at all. Even their spirits and temperament were exactly the same. There was no difference at all. Sir Bai did not seem to notice the 3 people who had appeared out of nowhere. He was still focused on the chessboard, deep in thought without any distractions in his mind. From time to time, he would collect the chess pieces one by one and place them down again. He repeated this process over and over again. Time passed bit by bit. Ever since the 3 people arrived, they had been standing behind him, motionless and silent. They didn't even make a sound. However, the anxiety on their faces was becoming more and more indescribable, and more intense. After a long, long time, it was almost midnight. Finally, one of them could not help but speak up. "Boss, you should make a decision." Sir Bai stared at the chessboard on the table and said faintly, "What decision? It's taboo to act recklessly in such a situation where there's no chance of survival. If you don't have a sufficient countermeasure, coming up with a decision will only be courting death by hastening your own defeat." Sigh. The 3 people behind him stomped their feet anxiously. "I'm not talking about that. It's the same." Sir Bai continued to stare at the chessboard, his voice calm and leisurely. "The chessboard and reality are the same. How can there be victory when one is confused and acts recklessly?" He lifted his head slowly to look at the white piece in his palm, and said faintly, "Life is like a chessboard and the chessboard is like life. I am this white chess piece. Right now, I'm at this delicate juncture. I can't advance, I can't retreat, I can't go left, I can't go right. A step forward is a mountain of blades and a sea of fire. A step back is a bottomless abyss. Staying where I am and watching the changes quietly, dealing with the changes with inaction might be the best choice. It's a pity that the game has already begun, and it's hard to stop. It's all because I'm already in the game. Serbai sighed softly as he looked at the white chess piece affectionately with 2 fingers. Big brother, you're being too pessimistic. This young brother thinks that while the current situation is dire, we still have room to maneuver, whether we attack or defend. Even if it doesn't work and we can't do anything, who in this world can stop us from being carefree when the few of us leave Tiantang City? Even if Yutong's military forces surround us, it won't be difficult for the 4 of us to fight our way out and break out of the siege with our abilities. Being in the game is only a limitation. Tiantang City is the limitation. As long as we leave Tiantang City, we'll be out of the game. Once we're not in the game, it doesn't matter whether it's the beginning or the end. Another person said, but big brother, please make a decision soon. Chapter 660. The Go Playbook. The 3 men behind him were speechless. Boss, we don't want to discuss this Go Playbook with you at all. What we want to discuss now is our life, death and future. Why can't you tell what's more important? You're still studying the Go Playbook at such a critical moment. Serbai said faintly, this Go Playbook. I've actually seen it before. The 3 men behind him were shocked, their expressions changing further. Then, Serbai sighed softly. Suddenly, a gurgling sound came from his throat as a mouthful of blood gushed up. He suppressed it with all his might, but a trickle of blood still seeped out from the corner of his mouth. At the same time, the 3 men behind him grunted as well, blood seeping from the corners of their mouths. Do you understand now? Serbai asked softly, wiping the blood from the corner of his mouth gracefully. The 3 men were pale as a sheet, their eyes gleaming with fear. What's going on? Serbai sucked in a deep breath, his gaze dim. I've implicated all of you this time. The 3 of them said at the same time. We are brothers. Going through life and death with Big Brother is what we ought to do. From the beginning to the end, we are willing to endure hardship as if it were malt syrup. However, we really don't understand this situation. What is going on? How do we explain it? Why are we suddenly so traumatized? Serbai looked out the window, his gaze distant as he said, back then, when Heaven's Inquisition was still in the human realm, I spent a fortune to have my fortune told by Heaven's Inquisition. Do you still remember this? The 3 men replied, of course we do. It was because of that calculation that our fortune was almost emptied. It was such a huge sum that we couldn't forget it even if we wanted to. Serbai said faintly, you know about that calculation, but you didn't know that I was already the 4 Seasons Tower civil official then. I was determined to rule the world, to bring peace to the world, to assist the king, to unify Tianxian, and to achieve the unprecedented feat of an emperor. However, I joined the 4 Seasons Tower by chance. Back then, I was lost about my future, not knowing what to choose. It was precisely because I was lost about my future that I decided to have my fortune read and leave my future in the hands of fate. Heaven's Inquisition is undoubtedly the best choice. It's also the only choice I can trust. The heavenly Tao is arbitrary, and it's the will of the heavens. I believe that you are still thinking about the result of my divination today. However, I haven't told you about it. It's not that I don't want to tell you, it's because I didn't really understand the prophecy of the heavenly divination. However, when this chess manual appeared in front of me, I suddenly understood. I understand everything now. So this is my fate, a fate determined by the heavens, and it cannot be avoided. Serbai spoke slowly. The other 3 became more and more perplexed as they listened. They said, Big brother, what you're saying is so confusing that we're even more confused. Can you just tell us what's going on? Serbai chuckled and said, Heaven's Inquisition spoke to me then. I've kept these words in my heart and never told anyone, so not even you know about them. However, it's these words that have kept me bottled up all my life. His gaze was distant as he said, pure gold and unpolished jade in the world of mortals, a dragon among men who have made contributions, It's a pity that I can't be the one chosen by the heavens, a dash of red that shakes the martial world. This life is like a dream. No one can say for sure. It's hard to win or lose when one enters the game of Go. One is a pawn, manipulated by others. Meeting the remnant of the manual is the end. Sirbai sucked in a soft breath and said, "For so many years, whether I'm busy or not, as long as I'm free, I'll study these few lines. Yet, I still don't understand them." The three of them widened their eyes and pondered over these words. However, they were completely confused and stunned on the spot. "Forget it. Let me explain it to you, so that you don't have to waste your time. The first two lines are pure gold and unpolished jade in the world of mortals. A dragon among men who have made contributions." Sirbai said, "It's basically saying that I'm a talent. If I can make contributions, I can become a dragon among men." The meaning of a dragon among men, in a general sense, refers to an official who holds the highest position and wields power in the imperial court. It's a pity that I can't be the one chosen by the heavens, a dash of red that shakes the martial world. These two lines are saying, no matter what my initial intentions were, no matter what I wanted to do, I couldn't walk the path that I wanted to walk the most. I didn't enter the imperial court, but I became a formidable figure in the martial world instead. Then there's this life is like a dream. No one can say for sure. It's hard to win or lose when one enters the game of Go. Sigh. He heaved a long sigh. I understand these two lines as well. It's, how can one's merits and demerits be determined? No matter what, I'm already trapped in the game of Go. It's hard to escape. Even in my dreams, I want to become a simple chess player, but in reality, I'm just a chess piece. Sirbai sighed deeply and said, "As for being a pawn manipulated by others, meeting the remnant of the manual is the end." Of these two sentences, I originally only understood the first one. Since I've become a pawn, I naturally have to be manipulated, or rather manipulated. At most, I'll perform better in the process of being a pawn, adding a few more colors to my life. That's all. As for the last line, I've never thought of its true meaning. It was only when I saw this Go manual that I was enlightened. So, this is the so-called remnant of the manual. This is the end of my fate. Sirbai sighed softly and said, "As for the Go manual I mentioned just now, this is the second time I've seen it." That day, Fang Yun snatched this Go manual from Yin Yang. He mused, as if he wanted to say something, but he stopped himself. After a long time, he said in a daze, "I remember the first time I saw this Go manual." Before he could finish his sentence, he fell silent again. The other three men felt their blood churning like they were about to spit another mouthful of blood, but they held it in. Sirbai said, "Back then, my career was hopeless, and I was oppressed by others. In my boredom, I focused on studying Go. I had nothing else to ask for in this life. Living in seclusion in the woods, it wasn't a bad choice. During that time, I traveled the world under the alias of Qi Yisheng, challenging Go experts everywhere. In the end, I won the title of one-hand Go saint. Do any of you have any impression of this saying? 1,000 tribulations, a single hand wins?" Sirbai's smile was bitter, his gaze filled with reminiscence, as if he had returned to that period of time. Speaking of which, that period of time was the happiest and most carefree of my life. I still reminisce about it every night. It would be delightful if this life could last forever. About a few years later, I unexpectedly received a message from the Four Seasons Tower's Heavenly Palace, High Cloud Pavilion. It said that a reclusive cultivator wanted to play a game of Go with me. Sirbai said in a low voice. Back then, I didn't think much of the Four Seasons Tower's reclusive cultivator, but I've heard of the Four Seasons Tower's name after all. I dared not be negligent then, so I rushed over. It's funny now that I think about it. Back then, I boasted that I was peerless in the world of Go, so I didn't think much of the other party. I even thought of preserving some of my ability to save the other party some face. After all, the other party was a reclusive cultivator. It didn't matter if I could win or not. Wouldn't it be fine as long as I knew who won or lost? When I got there, the other party let me rest for 3 days to recharge my energy. On the 4th day, we played a game of Go behind a curtain. At the beginning of the game, the person asked me, "How many games do you want to decide the winner?" Please note, according to the relevant laws and regulations of the country, please do not upload any pornographic, vulgar, political content or other illegal content. We will handle it according to the regulations and report it. Happy face. Chapter 661. Sirbai closed his eyes and said leisurely, "At that time, I thought I'd win for sure, but I dared not be presumptuous. How about 4 wins out of 7? The person opposite me smiled and said, "You're the chess saint of this generation. You've been unparalleled in Tianxian for the past few years, and have your own unique skills. However, I've been playing this game for more than 1,000 years. The outcome of the game is still up in the air. Let's go with 5 wins out of 9. Since there's nothing else to do, we can kill some time." I nodded in agreement, and even planned to win 4 out of 9 games, and let my opponent win 1 more to save face. However, what I didn't expect was that not only did each of the 9 games take longer than usual, but each of the 9 games took longer than the last. The first game took a day and a night, and I finally won by half a point. Through this game, I knew that my opponent was no weaker than me. In fact, he was a chess expert who was even stronger than me. Therefore, I was much more cautious after that. As for the opponent, he must have underestimated me in the first game and lost, so he became more cautious in the second game. In fact, in general, we didn't bring out our best in the first game. I guess we held back a lot. The second game went on for 7 days. In the end, I lost to my opponent by a single point. But even though I lost this game, I didn't feel depressed. Instead, I felt satisfied. This was a confrontation between high-level Go players. Although it took a long time, and I was inevitably exhausted, I was only physically tired and not mentally tired. Although I lost, my fighting spirit didn't diminish at all. I even felt that my Go skills had improved. After the second game, I rested for 3 days before starting the third game. When it came to the 9th game, which was the deciding game, both of us gave it our all. Basically, every move we made was an exhausting effort. Each move required the opponent to think for at least a few days. By the end of the 9th game, a year had passed since the start of the first game. A year. The other 3 people were speechless. He had only played 9 rounds of chess for an entire year. He had never heard of such a thing before. It was completely unheard of. After the 9th game, the person on the other side was very happy. He said that my chess skills were indeed worthy of my reputation, outstanding and extraordinary. Then, he asked me to take a look at the game, and handed me a booklet. Sirbai patted the Go record in his hand, and chuckled with an indescribable feeling. "I believe all of you must have connected the dots. Yes, this is it. I remember very clearly that one of the pages of the book was missing a corner, and under that corner, in the same position as the first game, was a tribulation material." As he said this, he flipped to the title page, and looked at the upper right corner of the diagram. Sure enough, it was a series of tribulations. Both sides wanted to raise their pieces, and both sides were only 1 step away from killing the other, and achieving a complete victory. And the position of this missing corner just so happened to be a black chess piece, which was placed there securely. This calamity material will determine the outcome of this game. It is also the only important calamity material in the entire game. Sirbai said. When he handed me this Go record, he said, "I've had this Go record for many years, but I've never been able to decipher it. I don't even know how to play the first game. Your Go skill is superb, and you're already a top-notch player. You're qualified to play this game. Come, let's study it and see if we can make a breakthrough." That was my experience when I first saw this incomplete record. Sirbai sucked in a deep breath and exhaled slowly. Unable to contain the agitation in his heart, he inhaled again and exhaled slowly. The other 3 people were already stunned. "But this Go record, doesn't this mean that there's a secret behind it?" One of them said hesitantly, "That's right, there's a secret behind it. Perhaps it's a lucky strike in another sense." Sirbai said. That day, Yun Yang came to the Crown Prince's residence, and said that he was here to look for me to solve the famous Go game. I didn't pay much attention to it at first. After all, It's been too long since a famous Go game caught my attention. However, when he laid out the game here, I recognized it immediately. This was the final game that I'd encountered back then. Looking at his subsequent 7 moves, I was even more certain that this wasn't just the game back then. It was the game that I'd disassembled with the reclusive expert. Back then, we'd disassembled it for 3 months, but we still couldn't solve it. Back then, I couldn't disassemble the final game and left in regret. Instead, I disassembled my life into the Four Seasons Tower. I didn't expect that I still couldn't solve it today. If it were only the final game, I wouldn't have been so rash. However, I saw the original Go record book again in the Crown Prince's residence. Serbai said, "This reality prompted me to make a plan right away, to kill Yun Yang on that very day." What I didn't expect was that not only did my flawless ambush fail to kill Yun Yang, but I also lost all 16 of my guards. Fang Yun was the only one who managed to escape. What surprised me the most about this outcome was that Yun Yang didn't kill all 16 of them. Forget it. The world is unpredictable. There are always accidents. However, the second target, this Go record, was snatched back. This can't be explained as an accident. Even then, I knew that the end of my life had come. Serbai sighed softly. From the beginning to the end, he did not mention who won and who lost the 9 Go games. The person behind him said with a frown, "Boss, if you really wanted to kill Yin Yang, why didn't you do it yourself? Let's take a step back and let the 3 of us do it." Even if Yin Yang was exceptionally capable, how could he have escaped from the 3 of us? Serbai chuckled humorlessly. Man proposes but God disposes. It's because God's will is unpredictable. If it's unpredictable, it'll exceed our expectations, and we'll lose the entire game. This is probably what they mean by fate. My success and failure in this life of mine are based on propriety. As for my failure, it's because I'm too propriety. When I saw the Go record being snatched back, I knew that I was wrong. The people I sent were wrong. However, it was already too late to change. Back then, I thought that I'd seen it clearly. Yun Yang was a young talent, the cream of the crop. His cultivation base was already at the pinnacle of the 9th heaven realm. It could be said that he was the cream of the crop, the cream of the crop. However, sending Fang Yin alone was already too much. It was like killing a chicken with a butcher's knife. Furthermore, with the help of 15 people, with such a lineup, even if there were 10 Yun Yangs, they should have been able to kill him in one go. There wouldn't be any accidents. Yet, I didn't manage to kill him. How could it not be God's will? Heaven's will, heaven's will. Could it be that God did it on purpose? This was the biggest mistake of my life. This mistake caused the entire game to be lost. Indeed, a single wrong word caused the entire game to be lost. Chapter 662. The 3 of them sighed at the same time. There was nothing wrong with this. It could only mean that the heavens were toying with them, or perhaps it was intentional. The auras of the pinnacle experts in Tiantang City had all disappeared at this juncture. More precisely, the ones with the highest cultivation base in the entire Tiantang City were Serbai's men. I've sent out 10 cats just to deal with a small mouse. Is it enough? Just by thinking about it, it's enough. It's more than enough. Do I have to send out 4 tigers just to deal with a small mouse? But that was exactly where the problem lay. Who would have thought that 10 cats would actually fail to take down that little mouse? Who could he reason with about this matter? Who could tell that the mouse was actually a cat-eating mouse? It was poisonous. Do you still remember how all 4 of us spat blood at the same time when I received this Go playbook? Asked Serbai. Yes, how could we not? Serbai chuckled bitterly. We cultivate the 4-directional deity brutality divine art. The advantage of this cultivation method lies in the fact that we share the same fate. Our cultivation progress is 4 to 16 times that of an ordinary person. It's a rare skill, but this is also its flaw. Once one of us is damaged, all of us will be damaged. This is because all 4 of our lifelines have merged into one. Once any one of us dies, the rest of us will die as well. There are no exceptions. Many people know about the existence of US brothers. It's no secret that I have a substitute, but no one knows that the death of one of us is equivalent to the death of all 4 of us. There's no need to be too pessimistic. After all, when we're together, we can unleash 16 times the power of each of us individually. Another man said, with the combined combat power of the four of us, we can even fight Ling Xiaozui head-on. That was in the past. It's destined not to work now. Sir Bai chuckled humorlessly, his expression grim. This Go manual has triggered the seal within me. We can't unleash much of our power anymore. That's why I said, it's me, that I've dragged you three brothers into this. He looked at his three brothers apologetically. I'm sorry. All three of them felt their blood boil. Big brother, what are you saying? We brothers have roamed unhindered our entire lives, enjoying ourselves in the Jianghu. We have long been able to break even, and we have quite a bit of wealth. Walking the same path in life and death was the true meaning of brotherhood. What are you apologizing for? Isn't that too distant? Sir Bai nodded in relief and then frowned. However, I still have a question that I don't understand. He did not go on, but thought to himself that there was something strange about the whole thing, and it was hard to explain it. Because the original owner of this chess manual was that person. Why was it in Yin Yang's hands now? It was understandable that Yin Yang had the Go manual, and used it as a medium to find him. After all, this was his hobby and many people knew about it. His skill in Go was considered famous, even in a small circle in Tiantang City. Therefore, how this Go manual had fallen into Yin Yang's hands was an unsolvable mystery. To Sir Bai's knowledge, the owner of this Go manual should not be friends with Yin Yang, no matter what. They should not even be acquainted with each other. The difference in power level was too great. In fact, it should be said that they were enemies. What was the reason for this Go manual to fall into Yin Yang's hands? If that person had the intention to kill him, why would he need to go through so much trouble? With a single thought, Sir Bai would be annihilated. However, what was the purpose of doing so? No matter what, Sir Bai was certain of one thing. From the moment the Go manual fell into his hands and triggered the seal, he would not be able to live. The one who wanted him dead was not the enemy, but that person. As long as that person wanted him dead, it would be useless even if he had escaped from Tiantang City and thousands of miles away. But why did that person want him dead? Moreover, by the looks of it, he was bound to die in Yin Yang's hands. However, this was incomprehensible. You've built the Four Seasons Tower painstakingly, but you've watched the tower's peripheral forces being devoured bit by bit. You've watched the Four Seasons Tower's talents die one by one. Why? The Four Seasons Tower has been the talk of the town for so many years, dominating the martial world. Why must you destroy your own foundation today? What is the end of all this? As Sir Bai pondered, he felt the blood in his body rush inexplicably. For a moment he felt dizzy, his vision blurred. He could not help but spit out another mouthful of blood. The three men behind him spat blood at the same time as well. Each of them swayed, their expressions drained of energy. I've always been a chess piece, manipulated by someone else. I can't believe that even my death will be manipulated by someone else. If there's a next life, Sir Bai said with a smile, I must be the Go player. I won't resign myself to being a chess piece. He chuckled sadly and said, Brothers, it looks like it's time. Let's be on our way. Blood trickled down the corners of the trio's mouths, as they looked up at him with complicated gazes. Do we still have to wait for someone to kill us, and help them complete a merit? Sir Bai smiled faintly. If he wants me to live like this, of course, I can live like this. However, if he wants me to die like this, I'm not resigned to it. I can't decide my own path of life. I still want to decide this path of death one last time. The trio shuddered. Where's Fang Yun? Fang Yun, Sir Bai closed his eyes. He's already taken some of my belongings far away in the martial world. Although we're fated to be unable to escape death today, there's still a day when our vengeance will be resolved. By then someone will avenge us. He smiled faintly. I'm the Four Seasons Tower's chess piece, but Fang Yun isn't. Let's be on our way. This is the last time I choose my own time of departure, not someone else's will. This time, I'm going to jump out of this Go board. Ha, ha. Jump out of the Go board with my life. Before his words echoed in the air, Sir Bai spat another mouthful of blood. Instead, he guffawed and said, Pure gold and unpolished jade in the secular world. A dragon among men who have accomplished much. It's a pity that I'm not destined to be the one. A dash of red that shakes the martial world. Amidst his laughter, a ball of flame rose inexplicably. Then, the entire study was engulfed in a towering inferno. It did not take more than half a cup of tea's time before the entire residence was engulfed by the raging inferno. The fire was unstoppable, dyeing half of Tiantang City's night sky crimson. In the night, Yunyang, Jilingxi, and the 10 Courts Yama Kings were rushing over. The place where the battle was supposed to take place was now a sea of fire. Is there a fire? Yunyang frowned, instinctively feeling that something was amiss. Faster, everyone! The group streaked across the night sky like a meteor shower, speeding away. I've written today's update, but I've wasted it once. Initially, I wrote after the battle, but I realized that it didn't feel right after I finished writing. Putting myself in their shoes, I thought, if I were such a person, would I be manipulated like this? That's why I became what I am now. Chapter 663. The large residence had long been engulfed by the raging fire. The tongue of flame that soared high up in the night sky was eye-catching. The billowing heat wave was torturous, even though it was 1,000 feet away. Yunyang and the others stopped in their tracks when they saw the scene, their eyes filled with disbelief. The place that caught fire is Sir Bai's residence. Yunyang's gaze froze. What happened? Why did it catch fire all of a sudden, and with such intensity? First Court King Qingguang replied. Caught fire? How can such a fire be a coincidence? It must have been premeditated. I reckon that it must have been prepared for a long time in advance. That's why it can be so ferocious once it erupts. With this fire as a barrier, our goal this time is destined to fail. Even the tiniest trace will be annihilated in the sea of fire. Yunyang snorted. His long form soared into the sky and disappeared in a flash in the air. Swoosh! It was as if the Milky Way was flowing backwards. Countless streams of water poured down from the sky and splashed onto the raging sea of fire. At the same time, 3 wells in Sir Bai's residence spewed out huge water pillars as well. With the convergence of heaven and earth, even such a fire did not last more than a dozen breaths before the sea of fire was completely extinguished. There was no spark left, only green smoke that rose in spirals. In spite of this, the convergence of heaven and earth continued to wash back and forth, causing the remaining heat wave to recede swiftly. Yunyang entered the residence of Bai swiftly in a flash. No matter how fast Yunyang's convergence of heaven and earth extinguished the fire, he could not save the residence of Bai that was engulfed by the sea of fire. The entire residence was filled with broken walls and debris, like a ghost town. Even the sturdiest beam had been charred. Yunyang made a quick round and released his deific consciousness. What he saw was the entire residence of Bai's servants and guards, all of them charred black, lying dead in their rooms and courtyards. Not a single one escaped. Sir Bai is ruthless. However, the discovery in the study surprised Yunyang. Initially, Yunyang had thought that the fire must be Sir Bai's plan to escape, to attract everyone's attention with the raging fire, while he took the opportunity to escape. He could also use the fire to completely erase all information about him, such as the servants and guards who had been burned to death outside. As long as Sir Bai could escape, there was no need to consider anything else. When Yunyang saw the 4 corpses on the ground, however, he was surprised. The faces of these 4 corpses were lifelike. Only their hair was slightly curled from the heat wave. He had no idea what method Sir Bai had used. Based on the direction of the fire, the study was obviously the first to catch fire, but this was the part that was preserved the most intact. This is too strange. None of this can be explained. One of the 4 must be Sir Bai. Yunyang studied them carefully. All 4 of them have the same face. Furthermore, he didn't use any disguise techniques. If he said that he had prepared it beforehand, it would be difficult for him to do such a thing. It would be even more superfluous and unreasonable. Everyone who had rushed over was speechless when they saw the scene. Had Sir Bai, who was rumored to be extremely intelligent and omnipotent, who had 3 substitutes, died without a trace just like that? He had died together with his 3 substitutes, without even a struggle to escape? The faces of the four of them were abnormally calm, as if this sudden death was nothing more than an ordinary matter to them, just like how they slept on time every night. Sir Bai, the important target of this trip, who had made everyone feel as if they were facing a formidable enemy and had prepared themselves to sacrifice themselves, had died without a trace, just like that. The indescribable disparity made everyone there feel like they had been through a roller coaster of emotions, as well as the sudden rise and fall of joy and sorrow. Sir Bai remained seated in front of the study table until the moment of his death. There was even a white Go piece in his right hand. The Go board in front of him was already covered in dust. Yun Yang blew away the dust with a soft breath, revealing the incomplete game he had played with Sir Bai the other day. On the table by the side of the Go board was a Go manual. Yun Yang recognized it. It was the Go manual that he had taken from Feng Xiang'a and had been snatched away by Sir Bai's men. The study room was the starting point of the fire, so it should have been the place where the fire was the most intense. If only the four corpses had been preserved, it could still be explained by the fact that the four men's cultivation base was profound. Although the basic qi left in the bodies could still protect the corpses, the Go board and Go pieces were not destroyed by the fire. What was more, the Go manual had survived as well. Yun Yang would never believe that there was no mystery behind it. He picked up the Go manual gently and found that there were other words written on the table under the manual. Someone had carved the words directly on the table with his finger. There were only 7 words in total, but there was an indescribable and strange atmosphere between the lines. It was full of pride. The 7 words were, "Supreme Cloud, you didn't expect this, did you?" Yin Yang's pupils contracted at once. "Supreme Cloud, you didn't expect this, did you? What did I not expect? Supreme Cloud? Are you sure of my identity? If so, why didn't you say so?" This was a huge secret, one that could be exchanged for a great price. Also, who forced you to kill yourself? More precisely, why did you kill yourself? After examining the corpses, Feng Mafei said, "The cause of death of these people is suicide. They died by severing their meridians. There's no doubt about this, but before they severed their meridians, their vitality was drained by an unknown method. Their internal organs showed signs of exhaustion. It's like they were under some strange method that caused their vitality to drain away. But the blood in their bodies doesn't show any signs of deterioration. You must know that blood is the source of life. In a situation where there is no vitality, the blood should be the first to deteriorate. But they don't show any signs of this. Only then did they die by severing their meridians. In other words, they should have perished together after the fire started. Why is this so? There are so many mysteries and it's hard to unravel." Yun Yang slammed his palm on the table and said faintly, "There's no need to worry about it. They're dead now. This is the end." The table turned into dust with a loud pop. The words that revealed Yun Yang's identity as Supreme Cloud were gone, unseen by anyone other than Yun Yang. "Search the house," Yun Yang said calmly. "Bring everything of value back and pay attention to the secret chambers. Since the target was probably unwilling to die, there might really be some clues left behind." The group obeyed and began to move separately. As expected, they found the secret chambers. Moreover, they found a total of 4 secret chambers. Surprisingly, they were empty. There was nothing inside, which was very different from what Yun Yang had expected. Such a large fire had already alerted the Imperial City Guards, and soldiers and horses were constantly gathering in this direction. Chapter 664. Yun Xiaoyao stood at the door with his hands behind his back. His expression was cold, and he said nothing. When everyone who came saw Yun Xiaoyao standing there as a gatekeeper, they immediately knew that this was not something they could meddle in. They stopped at once, and no one stepped forward to ask questions, lest they invite a rebuff, until the Crown Prince arrived with a few guards, panting and disheveled. Seeing Yun Xiaoyao at the door, he stepped forward and bowed. "I see that Uncle Yun is here. Greetings. Where are you headed, Your Highness?" Yun Xiaoyao asked faintly. "I heard that something happened to Sir Bai, and I was anxious. I came to visit him. Has Sir Bai been saved?" The Crown Prince replied, "Your Highness is indeed a man who values friendship and loyalty. It's a pity that I have other reasons for coming here. I really didn't notice if there were any survivors here. Uncle Yin, I would like to go in and take a look. His Highness looked anxious. Sirbai had too many things in his hands. Once these things were exposed, it was uncertain whether he would be able to keep his life, let alone sit on the throne. How could the Crown Prince not be anxious? He knew that his arrival would leave a mark, but he had to come anyway. Yin Xiaoyao said coldly. They are still dealing with the aftermath inside, and there is still a considerable degree of danger remaining. If your Highness wishes to go in, I'm afraid you'll have to wait a little longer. As the saying goes, a gentleman does not stand under a collapsing wall. Why rush? The Crown Prince could not afford to wait. His forehead beaded with sweat, he said. Uncle Yun, I must go in immediately. Sir Bai is the chief advisor of the Crown Prince's residence. I urgently want to know if he is dead or alive. I think I have the right to go in and see how Sir Bai is. The Crown Prince's tone had gradually turned forceful, obviously intending to barge in by force. If it were not for his fear of Yin Xiaoyao's reputation and martial prowess, he would have barged in by force. Yin Xiaoyao's eyes gleamed sharply as he said faintly, If your Highness is in a hurry, then try to barge past me. As long as your Highness can do it, I guarantee that no one will stop your Highness from doing anything in the future. The Crown Prince was speechless. Yin Xiaoyao's sharp gaze swept past the Crown Prince. Suddenly, he raised his aura to its peak and looked at the guards behind the Crown Prince. The 8 guards accompanying the Crown Prince felt as if a mountain had suddenly descended upon them. They could not help but let out a muffled groan as their legs went weak. They knelt on the ground in an orderly manner, unable to even stand up for a moment. Yin Xiaoyao replied, Whether you plead verbally or beg on your knees, I am indifferent. Besides, I am worthy of your kneeling. Since all of you have knelt down, stay on your knees. Don't get up. His aura was like a mountain, even more so than before, suppressing these people until they couldn't stand up. No, they couldn't even move. The Crown Prince took a step forward. Yin Xiaoyao's gaze was warm as he looked at the Crown Prince with a smile, as if he was looking at his nephew. However, one of his hands was already gently placed on the hilt of the sword at his waist. The Crown Prince immediately sensed a wave of ruthless aura surging toward him. His entire body was enveloped by a terrifying atmosphere, and his hair stood on end. He had clearly lifted his foot, but he did not dare to step down. Would Yin Xiaoyao dare to kill me? Yin Xiaoyao dares to kill me. Cold sweat trickled down the Crown Prince's forehead as he froze on the spot. At that moment, silhouettes flickered in Sir Bai's residence. Yin Yang was the first to step out, his expression calm and composed. Yin Xiaoyao's gaze met his and Yin Yang blinked. At that moment, a thick fog appeared behind Yin Yang and rose into the air. Everyone who had participated in the operation disappeared into the thick fog, vanishing without a trace. Only Yin Yang and Yin Xiaoyao were left at the door. Yin Xiaoyao said faintly, Since this is over, let's go. The father and son duo strode forward together and swaggered off, not uttering a single word of nonsense. They did not even spare a glance at the Crown Prince who was right in front of them. The Crown Prince's expression grew even more displeased, his eyes glinting with malice. It's fine if I can't ascend to the throne in this lifetime, but if I can rule the world, Yin Xiaoyao, Yin Yang, I'll exterminate your entire family and your entire family. I'll cut you into pieces and consign you to eternal damnation. Go in. Although he knew that there would most likely be nothing useful left after Yin Yang had searched the place, His Highness still held on to a sliver of hope. Casting a vicious glance at the 8 guards whom he had relied on as a wall, the Crown Prince felt incredibly aggrieved. His ability was still too weak. So weak that others would not even spare a glance at him. What should he do? Did you find anything inside? Yin Xiaoyao asked. Nothing at all. The development of this matter is too strange. Everything seems so unexpected, full of twists and turns. It's inexplicable. Yin Yang was genuinely distressed. In his imagination, a civil and military official like Sir Bai would have to struggle with all his might to match his identity and common sense, no matter what. Compared to the current situation, he should have been faced with countless conspiracies and traps, deliberately set up to mislead him, or even directly kill him. Perhaps something else would have been more appropriate. However, None of the preparations he had made had been used. Sirbai had died so mysteriously. He had even died in triumph, revealing Yin Yang's true identity before he died. The phrase Supreme Cloud, "You didn't expect this, did you?" was truly an insolence that could still be high-spirited even in death. After this battle, he had somehow fallen into a disadvantageous position. However, no matter how Yin Yang racked his brains, he could not figure out why. There were no clues left at the scene, let alone anything of value. This outcome made the situation even more confusing. If there was something to be gained, it would be the expression on the dead man's face. After careful observation, Yin Yang came to a conclusion. Sirbai, who was sitting on the chair, was in a relaxed state when he died while the other three were calm. It was a relaxed expression of letting go of something, or getting rid of something. That was probably it. There was a white go piece in Yin Yang's palm. Before Sirbai died, he had been holding this white go piece in his hand. Yin Yang felt that if Sirbai's death had any hint or obsession, or if there was something he could not let go of, it would fall on him. But he had died a clean death, and all that was left was this white chess piece in his hand. What did it mean? If it was a hint, what was it? Yin Yang opened his palm and stared deeply at the white go piece. He frowned and did not speak for a long time. Chapter 665. Looking at the chess piece in Yin Yang's hand, Yin Xiaoyao suddenly asked, "Is this what Sirbai held in his hand before he died?" "That's right." Yin Yang nodded. "How much can this chess piece say?" Yin Xiaoyao asked again. Yin Yang was deep in thought. Yin Yang had already checked it again and again. This was really just an ordinary chess piece. There was really not much to say. Yin Xiaoyao paused and said, "The practical significance of a chess piece is nothing more than a component of the chessboard. In other aspects, even as a secret weapon of an unparalleled expert, its effect is not as significant as it is on the chessboard." Yin Yang replied, "This isn't absolute. Different people have different opinions. I, on the other hand, think that if a chess piece's corresponding move is used well, it can determine the outcome of the game." Yin Xiaoyao said, "That's true." Yin Yang was still nodding. Chess piece. Yin Xiaoyao racked his brain, wanting to provide Yin Yang with more ideas, but there was nothing more he could say no matter how hard he racked his brain. Chess piece. Yin Yang was deep in thought. A chess piece. Without a person, a chess piece is a rock, a piece of rotten wood, a dead object. It will only be useful when it falls into the hands of a person. In the hands of an expert in secret weapons, even the most ordinary chess piece can be used to determine life and death. Therefore, the key is still the person and the hand. Before Sirbai died, the last thing he did was to set up a game of Go and hold a chess piece in his hand. Yin Yang said, "Do you think he felt that he was a chess piece and that he was unwilling to die?" He turned abruptly to look at Yin Xiaoyao. Yin Xiaoyao sighed softly. "Who isn't a chess piece in this world?" Yin Yang frowned and said, "His death was strange but effortless. Could he have thought that he had freed himself from the fate of being a chess piece and being controlled by others through his death? At the last moment of his life, he broke free from a terrifying hand by deciding the moment of his death? If that's the case, it makes sense," Yin Yang said. Yin Xiaoyao was deep in thought, speechless for a moment. It was obvious that the logic in Yin Yang's words was beyond his comprehension. Looks like the person behind him is really terrifying. Otherwise, why would he resort to suicide to put up such an extreme resistance? Yin Yang said, "I think he had confirmed his final path of return and was finally willing. He didn't expect to be manipulated by a chess player before he died, so he chose to commit suicide. Since I'm going to die no matter what, I might as well choose how I die." Or did his suicide destroy the chess player's plan? Yin Yang pondered. "If I have been manipulated all my life, can I use my power to retaliate against this person who has manipulated me all my life before I die? If I can use my death as the last and most extreme counterattack, it will be a consolation. Therefore, Sirbai is truly a wise man. I just don't know if this wise man's thinking direction is the same as mine." However, before Sirbai died, he held a white go piece in his palm. Does this color white have any other meaning? The Nine Supremes' supreme cloud was also the Nine Supremes' supreme wit. Wise men and wise men would always think alike. As the saying went, great men thought alike, and wise men thought alike or even more. After some speculation, Yun Yang felt that even though he could not fully replicate what Sir Bai had in mind, he was still confident that he could do so. Returning to the residence of Yun Yang set up the Go game in his room. He sat with his legs crossed and focused on the Go board. At this moment, he had completely immersed his thoughts into Sir Bai's state of mind. According to Yun Yang's understanding of Sir Bai, this person could be said to be meticulous in his calculations. If such a person were to be a civil official, it would be a piece of cake for him to move freely in the imperial court. It would only take him some effort, even if he were to control the world. At the very least, he could become a minister. If he were to enlist in the military, he would at least be another Han Sanha. Even if he could not compare to Han Sanha, he should not be weaker than Qiu Jianhan and Leng Daoyin. If I were Sir Bai, I have the talent to rule the world and the wisdom to bring peace and stability to the country, but I'm only one of the civil and military ministers of a martial world organization in the Four Seasons Tower. I have to be controlled and controlled all the time, unable to break free. Will I be aggrieved? Yun Yang asked himself. I will be aggrieved. I definitely will. Yun Yang looked at the Go board. Since I'm aggrieved, what should I do? I can't even control my own life and death. What else can I do? There's only hope if I live. Persevere for a long time. Maybe I can endure until the end, and the day when I can break free. This should be my initial thought. A wise man is human too. A human is not willing to give up hope, and the chance of a fluke. Yet after working hard for so long, I don't get the result I want. Until one day, when I realize that not only am I unable to break free from the control of my life and death, but I'm about to be abandoned, what will happen then? Yun Yang was shaken as he murmured, why would I think of being abandoned? He immediately recalled the injuries of Sir Bai and the other three. Their life essence had deteriorated, and their organs had dried up. Yun Yang suddenly thought of Supreme Lord Springfrost back then. He seemed to have understood something and figured something out. If this is the case, Yun Yang sucked in a deep breath and looked at the white chess piece in his palm, saying softly, Sir Bai, if I've guessed correctly, you should have left something for me. Why didn't I find anything? What did you actually leave for me? This doesn't make sense. More importantly, he actually knows that I'm Supreme Cloud. Why would he know? Even if he guessed it, he should have sufficient proof. He knows that I'm Supreme Cloud, but he didn't say anything. Previously we were on opposing sides. Going against the Nine Supremes has always been the Four Seasons Tower's ultimate goal. He knows that I'm Supreme Cloud, but he didn't reveal it to the higher authorities of the Four Seasons Tower. With the Four Seasons Tower's emphasis on the Nine Supremes' intelligence, if he had known earlier, he would only need to report it, and it would be a great merit. Therefore, he must have guessed it not long ago. With this merit, he might even want to break free from the control. At the very least, he could live a much better life. There's nothing to lose. Then it can be confirmed that he didn't know long ago, but only found out just now. If he only found out just now, why didn't he choose to report it in exchange for benefits? It must be because at this time, he had already discovered that his 5 internal organs had dried up, that he realized that the Four Seasons Tower was targeting him, that he wanted him dead. At this point, it was already too late for him to turn the situation around. That's why he chose to hide my identity. No matter how Yin Yang thought about it, there was still something he could not figure out. Chapter 666. If Sir Bai had known that he was Supreme Cloud, he would never have sent only 16 men to assassinate him. It would have been reasonable for Sir Nian to do it himself. Why then? Or rather, when was the time to confirm his identity as Supreme Cloud? Yin Yang felt as if his vision was shrouded in mist. In spite of this, he had a clear feeling that as long as this fog was cleared, the sky before him would be clear. There would be no more obstacles. But how was he going to do it? He looked at the Go game in front of him and caressed the Go record in his hand. His brows were locked in a frown, and he remained silent for a long time. On the other side, Ling Xiaozui and Duge Chou combined their swords and dashed down from the top of a mountain. Ling Xiaozui carried Feng Xiang'e while Duge Chou carried Heaven's Inquisition, Gu Chaoyang. Both Feng Xiang'e and Heaven's Inquisition were already covered in blood and wounds. Gu Chaoyang could still stay conscious, but Feng Xiang'e was already unconscious and had lost consciousness. We must dash to the bottom of the mountain. Heaven's Inquisition's voice was weak. The entire forest below can obscure the heavens. Only by dashing there will we have a chance of survival. Only then will we have the right to talk about anything else. Duge Chou's chest was covered in blood as well. He nodded in agreement and increased his speed. Previously, the four experts had the upper hand in Mr. Nian and the mysterious black-clothed man, Liang Sanghai, and had even set up a tracking plan. How could they be at a disadvantage now? Moreover, they seemed to be in an extremely disadvantageous state of being pursued. The answer was actually very simple. There were 17 to 18 silhouettes behind the two of them. Each of the pursuers was like a demonic god that had emerged from hell, pursuing them relentlessly. The combined aura of this group of people stirred the wind and clouds in the sky into pieces. Along the path of death, where the sword energy that was casually waved past, thousands of feet of mountains crumbled, and the ground cracked. Ling Xiaozui and Duge Chou sprinted forward as if their lives depended on it. Green light encircled them. Although they were in dire straits, there was not the slightest hint of panic or impatience. The long sword in his hand continued to emit sword qi, blocking all of the enemies pursuing sword qi. His feet were not in the slightest bit messy, and he did not slow down in the slightest. From beginning to end, his movements were as smooth as flowing water. This speed was truly fast to the extreme, indescribable. At that moment, the two of them moved in two different directions, and finally converged once again. This way, Ling Xiaozui was the first to shoot out like an arrow. This time, he charged forward at top speed, seeking to reach the destination in the shortest amount of time possible. He had truly expended all of his cultivation base into speed. The reason Ling Xiaozui dared to do so was because Duge Chou was behind him, blocking all the attacks that were aimed at both of them with all his might, without missing a single one. The 17 to 18 people who were chasing after them were impressive. Even with Ling Xiaozui and Duge Chou's astounding cultivation base, they could not shake off the pursuers, even when they exerted their full strength. Of course, the enemy's relentless pursuit and relentless attacks could not close the distance, nor could they break through Duge Chou's defense. Along the way, the mountains collapsed and the ground cracked, creating a scene of devastation. Although both Ling Xiaozui and Duge Chou were safe for now, they still felt like they were in a sorry state. It had been a long time since they were in such a sorry state. It was a disgrace to their status as the unrivaled experts of 2 generations. This is strange. Ling Xiaozui still had the time to joke. Heaven's Inquisition. We were moving together with you, but we were ambushed as well. Isn't this unexpected? Where's the heaven's will that you always talk about? Gu Chaoyang was flushed. The mountain they were on was covered in formations. It was a massive, all-encompassing setup that blinded heaven's will. How could I have predicted that there would be someone in this world who could come up with such a grand setup? It's not the fault of the battle. Duge Chou guffawed and said, there's a limit to one's strength. Today, I finally know that Heaven's Inquisition doesn't know everything. Actually, being tricked once in a while is a fresh experience as well. You can learn from the past. Ling Xiaozui guffawed. Indeed. It's a pity that Feng Xiang'e was completely tricked this time. He was beaten to the point that he almost died. What a tragedy. Gu Chaoyang was flushed as he said, perhaps it's really heaven's will. Nonsense. If it's really heaven's will, heaven must have done it on purpose. Ling Xiaozui and Duge Chou scoffed at the same time. How can you still talk about heaven's will? Both of them were joking, but there was still something strange in their hearts. Perhaps the art of being blinded by heaven's will was exceptionally lofty and unattainable in the eyes of an ordinary person. But these few men were far more knowledgeable and experienced than an ordinary person. They did not think too much of it. Each of them was aware of what was going on. The strange thing was, how did the Four Seasons Tower know that they were coming? They had gone through many things along the way to reach this place. It was not an easy task. Now that they were here, the four of them were surrounded before they could even make a move. 18 people appeared from 18 different directions, surrounding the four of them tightly like dumplings, without leaving any gap. Furthermore, it was not a big deal to be blinded, or even to be surrounded. There was always a reason for everything to happen. However, what truly concerned Ling Xiaozui and Ling Xiaozui, or rather shocked them, was that the cultivation base of the 18 people who had formed the encirclement was actually on par with their own. The reality was more sensational. It was a ghastly sight to behold. Since when had there been so many pinnacle experts in this world? Why had they never heard of them before? Looking at this lineup, it seemed that their status as the world's #1 expert of the previous 2 generations could not be considered to be fully deserved, but in reality, facing such a lineup, the four of them had no intention of fighting recklessly. Fighting recklessly would be courting death. Besides, they truly had no intention of accomplishing the goal that they had set. It was more appropriate for them to turn and break out of the encirclement to escape. Gu Chaoyang's cultivation base was slightly weaker, so he was successfully intercepted during his escape. If Dugacho had not been paying attention to his condition, and performed the art of man, and soared as one to save him, he would have been hacked to death by the flurry of swords. In spite of this, he was still gravely injured and could no longer fight. As for Feng Xiang'e, he was worse off. His cultivation base was the weakest among the four of them. When they had attacked Liang Songhai previously, he had been the one who had suffered the most damage. What was even more unfortunate was that he was the leader of this operation, the frontmost position among the four of them. When it was time to retreat, he naturally became the one to cover the rear. However, Feng Xiang'e could not fulfill the task of covering the rear, be it his physical condition or his actual cultivation base. He could not handle any one of the opponents, not even one-on-one. Therefore, it had not been more than 2 encounters before he had been struck by a saber, a sword, and a few punches and kicks. His body was almost torn apart. Ling Xiaozui had used all his might to forcefully break through the 10 people's encirclement. Only then did he manage to carry Feng Xiang'e out. They had fled for their lives all the way here. This ambush is too unexpected, too abrupt. It shouldn't be. Ling Xiaozui and Dugacho were veterans who had been in the martial world for who knew how many years. Exchanging glances, no one spoke a word as they continued to flee. As they spoke, the two of them had already pierced straight through the white mist like meteors chasing after the moon. Behind the layer of white mist was a cliff that was thousands of meters tall. Not to mention jumping. Just looking at it would cause one's heart to tremble, and their souls to leave their bodies. However, the two of them didn't hesitate in the slightest and jumped straight down. The 18 pursuers behind them were hot on their heels. They landed uniformly at the edge of the cliff, but did not continue their pursuit. This should be enough, right? Almost. Let's go back then. Chapter 667. At the bottom of the cliff, Dugacho was panting heavily. Ling Xiaozui was equally exhausted, but his condition was even worse than Dugacho's. He had fought the combined attacks of 10 men alone, and it had greatly exceeded his body's limit. Although he was not completely exhausted, his vitality had been greatly damaged, and it would be difficult for him to go on any further. Almost every breath he took carried the scent of blood. Let's heal them first. Otherwise, they won't be able to hold on before we get back, said Ling Xiaozui. All right. Taking out the medicinal pills, they condensed their qi into water at the bottom of the cliff and poured it into their mouths. Gu Chaoyang moaned, I can drink it myself. Ugh. In spite of this, both of them forced it down his throat without a word. Then, both of them rested for a while. When they felt that their strength had recovered, they fled again with the other 2 men. They ran 3,000 miles and found a secluded cave to hide in. We can take a good rest here. Finding a flat spot to put the 2 men down, Dugacho and Ling Xiaozui exchanged a look. Both of them chatted softly as they went out. I don't have much medicine left. Do you have any good medicine for internal injuries? I don't have much with me either. I didn't expect things to turn out like this. Even with the 4 of us working together, we still ended up like this. Forget it. You go left and I'll go right. Let's search along the way. This forest is unusually hidden and treacherous. Perhaps there are undiscovered treasures of heaven and earth. Let's try our luck. All right, we'll try our luck now. After walking out, both of them did not go left and I'll go right as promised. Instead, they took a detour and came together again, acting suspiciously. The place where they came together was dozens of miles away from the cave. Who do you think it is? Dugacho looked grim. What do you think? Ling Xiaozui was hesitant as well. It's hard to say. It could be anyone. Anyone is suspicious. Dugacho sighed. I haven't thought about it before. Now that I think about it, there have been too many coincidences since this incident. These two fellows. How long has it been since they last appeared? Why did they suddenly appear this time? Ling Xiaozui mused. If one of them had spent so much effort to set up such a trap, would we be able to escape from it? There's no need for that, Dugacho said faintly. The moment we realized that we were ambushed, both of us were quite wary of each other. For people like us to set up an ambush, it has to be based on one premise: we won't run. Anything else is meaningless. Don't tell me you didn't guard against a sneak attack when you were carrying someone on your back? We both know this in our hearts. Even if they really launched a sneak attack, it would only cause some trouble and light injuries. It's impossible for it to be fatal. I agree with you. If we don't have them to drag us down, we can work together with our swords, and we won't be afraid of any assassination. Don't be so optimistic. Don't you know that those 18 people have the power to keep all of us here? Ling Xiaozui sucked in a breath. Instead, I find it incomprehensible that such a painstaking ambush has allowed us to charge out. At least, it's much better than the worst-case scenario that I had predicted. Dugacho completely agreed with Ling Xiaozui's words. That's right. But the truth is that we've charged out, and all four of us have survived. We've even learned of their true capabilities. This is already a great gain. Why is that so? If we take this as an argument, then it doesn't seem like the other party was ambushing us. Instead, it seems like they were delivering important information to us. It's interesting and intriguing. Both of them pondered for a long time, but they still could not figure out the crux of the matter. They should not have been ambushed, but they had. Since they had been ambushed, and the other party's combined abilities were so strong, it should not have been so easy for them to escape. Yet the truth was that they had done so easily. All of this was filled with too many illogicalities and paradoxes. How many questions and secrets were hidden in it? Both of them had no idea. In spite of this, one thing was certain. The other party definitely had an objective. But what was this objective? Although it might not be them, we must never let our guard down in the future. Any carelessness can cause us to lose everything. This was the common understanding that both of them had at the moment. We've been in the martial world for so many years, but we've actually been tricked once. We've embarrassed ourselves enough. If we're going to be tricked again, we can just slit our own throats. Dugacho chuckled. I'm actually very interested to know what other arrangements the other party has made. After setting up such a grand game of chess, it'll be meaningless if the follow-up isn't exciting enough. Ling Xiaozui was not as optimistic as he said. Don't let your guard down. The other party's objective is unknown, but their capabilities are terrifyingly strong. It's a lineup that can really kill us. If either Heaven's Inquisition or Feng Xiang'e is the mole, he'll definitely try his best to lead us to the path he wants. On the other hand, if both of them are innocent, the other party will still have other plans to advance their goals. Ling Xiaozui said seriously, all in all, we have to be more careful along the way. We have to be alert at all times. Of course, when both of them returned, each of them had a handful of spiritual medicine from the mountain in their hands. Then they went about their duties, taking care of one each, treating their wounds and administering blood. After some time, Feng Xiang'e and Gu Chaoyang woke up one after another. Both of them looked aggrieved and miserable. Feng Xiang'e began to grumble at Gu Chaoyang, full of resentment. Sir Heaven's Inquisition, you're known as the best fortune teller, knowing 5,000 years in the past and 5,000 years in the future. How could you lead us into such a trap? No one else can do this. Gu Chaoyang defended himself with a flushed face. I've tested each of us before we came. There's no sign of a bloody disaster, let alone a life-threatening one. Does this situation count as fitting? Feng Xiang'e was enraged, baring his teeth. Fitting my *SS. Let me ask you, what is a bloody disaster? Look at me. Is there a piece of flesh left unharmed? Wasn't this a huge bloody disaster? Do we have to lose our heads to be considered a bloody disaster? Gu Chaoyang was tongue-tied. After some time he argued. We're not dead, so our lives aren't in danger. Is that wrong? Feng Xiang'e's rage grew. If Ling Xiaozui and Duge Chou hadn't risked their lives, would we have survived? Gu Chaoyang's eyes darted around as he said, turning misfortune into fortune, is a good thing. Do you know that? Also, we should thank someone for saving our lives first. Feng Xiang'e opened his mouth but choked. Did you thank them? He asked angrily. He then turned to Ling Xiaozui and Duge Chou and said solemnly, brothers, thank you. I'll get both of you a few pots of good wine to drink when I get back. Ling Xiaozui chortled. I'll be waiting then. I'm drooling just thinking about the god of wine's fine brew. I've had a little of it before, and it's lingering in my dreams lately. Duge Chou smiled as well. His gaze when he looked at Gu Chaoyang was tinged with chilliness. Chapter 668. Feng Xiang'e had done so, grumbling and acting so righteously. In the eyes of others, it was obvious that he was innocent. Furthermore, he had indeed brought out many rare wines. With Ling Xiaozui and Duge Chou's experience, there was no one else who could have done this. It was indeed the god of wine who had done it. On the other hand, Heaven's Inquisition, Gu Chaoyang, had not displayed any ability related to the legend of Heaven's Inquisition until now. An expert who claimed to be omniscient had failed to divine the trap ahead of him, and claimed that he had been shielded from Heaven's will when he entered. Yet he still could not divine it. Up until now, he had only been making excuses without any concrete evidence. He was highly suspicious. Let's rest here for a few days and recover, Ling Xiaozui said with a smile. We'll go back when it's about time. Feng Xiang'e asked, go back? Where can we go back to? Ling Xiaozui chuckled. Of course we have to go back to Tiantang City. There are still things to be done there, especially since we have a lot of things there as well. Heaven's Inquisition nodded and said, that's right. It's necessary to return to Tiantang City. Duge Chou smiled faintly and said faintly, however, the incident this time was unexpected. We came in high spirits, intending to completely dismantle the Four Seasons Tower. I didn't expect the Four Seasons Tower to have hidden so many pinnacle experts. When we were ambushed just now, it was truly a shock to this old man. Ling Xiaozui sighed as well. It's not that the Four Seasons Tower doesn't want to kill you, but if they really wanted you dead, you would have taken at least half of the 18 people today. The Four Seasons Tower has gone through so much to hide so many experts. They must be planning something big. How could they lose them in a battle with you? Duge Chou chuckled and said, you don't have to be so humble. It's not that the Four Seasons Tower doesn't want to kill you, but if the Four Seasons Tower really wanted to kill you, at least half of the 18 people here today would have to be taken away by you. The Four Seasons Tower has gone through so much effort to hide so many experts. They must be planning something big. How could they lose them in a battle with you? Ling Xiaozui thought about it and said, that makes sense. Duge Chou asked casually, Heaven's Inquisition, listening to Mr. Nian's conversation with you, there must be some history between you and them. I wonder if you know anything about the Four Seasons Tower's people, or have foretold anything. Don't tell me you don't know anything about this. These words were uncontrollably thorny. Gu Chaoyang wore a bitter expression as he said, I've been imprisoned by Mr. Nian for many years. My knowledge of the Four Seasons Tower's people, objects, and resources is shallow. As for divination, I've actually done it when I woke up just now. I can confirm that the group of people has returned and are hiding in the mountain once again. I've mentioned the mountain briefly before. There's a setup in the mountain that can shield the heavenly oracle. My divination is completely useless, Duge Chou chuckled and said. In other words, as long as they're on that mountain, you won't be able to divine them, right? Gu Chaoyang sighed and nodded. Yes. He knew that it was inappropriate, but he had never expected such a place to exist in this world. Duga Cho smiled faintly, but there was a tinge of mockery in his smile. Ling Xiaozui frowned and said in a low voice, "The Four Seasons Tower is indeed formidable. We've still underestimated the legendary unrivaled tower in the world." Feng Xiang'a snorted and leaned into Gu Chaoyang to say, "Heaven's Inquisition, please divine when this old man will die." Gu Chaoyang grimaced. "Feng Xiang'a, we've just escaped from danger, and you're just standing there in a daze. Don't you have anything good to divine?" Duga Cho said, "How is this Wrigley? We should be very concerned about matters of life and death. Now that we're caught unprepared and the situation is changing subtly, with your divine foretelling here. When are we going to wait if we don't seize the opportunity to hear about it? Quick help Feng Xiang'a. I think this fellow's life force has been severely depleted. Together with his previous injuries, I don't think he has many years left to live." Feng Xiang'a chided jokingly. "Duga Cho, you old B***starred. You're older than me. Why don't you say that you don't have many years left to live?" Duga Cho guffawed and urged, divine quickly. I've long heard that Heaven's Inquisition's divination is unparalleled in this world, but I've never seen it with my own eyes. It's a shame. If it doesn't work today, we won't let you go." Gu Chaoyang was helpless, looking at Ling Xiaozui pleadingly. Ling Xiaozui looked at him for a while and said, "If it's inconvenient or inauspicious, just don't say it out loud." Gu Chaoyang chuckled and said, "If so, let me take a look." He studied Feng Xiang'a's face with rapt attention, studying him from head to toe. Feng Xiang'a still wore a disdainful smile as he glanced sideways at Gu Chaoyang. However, the more Gu Chaoyang looked at Feng Xiang'a's face, the more perplexed he looked. After some time, he shook his head as if to shake off the dizziness, then a deep frown formed on his face. This isn't right. Gu Chaoyang was already screaming in his heart, full of doubts, but he did not show it on his face. He was only deep in thought. People like Gu Chaoyang had always had a habit of reading the faces of the people he came into contact with, whether they were useful or not. After that, he would bury the information in his heart. Those who asked would pay a certain price, and once they were satisfied, they would give some vague advice. It could be said that they were pointing out the right path, or that they were deliberately mystifying, but it was hard to come to a conclusion. During this period of time, Gu Chaoyang had read the faces of Ling Xiaozui, Duga Cho, and Feng Xiang'a so many times that he was familiar with them. However, looking at Feng Xiang'a's face this time, Gu Chaoyang was taken aback. Why has Feng Xiang'a's face changed? Gu Chaoyang's heart was in turmoil. Looking at his physiognomy, although he still has a long life ahead of him, he'll stop at a few decades to 100 years at most. It's inevitable that he'll die. But why does it look like his physiognomy has changed? With such exuberant vitality, he might not die even after a few thousand years. What's wrong with him? Could it be that I've seen wrongly? Or has Feng Xiang'a been hiding his strength? But he's heavily injured now. How can he hide his strength? This is impossible. It doesn't make sense. Could it be someone else? No, it's still impossible. This aura, this sense, it's impossible that it's someone else. Gu Chaoyang studied Feng Xiang'a's face for a long time, bewildered, not speaking for a long time. Feng Xiang'a snorted and said, "Why? Don't tell me that I'm going to die soon? It's too inauspicious, so you're too embarrassed to say it?" As he spoke, Gu Chaoyang snorted as well, lifting his head to look at Feng Xiang'a's face. Just as he was about to speak, he was stunned again. This was because the extremely rich vitality that Feng Xiang'a had exuded earlier had vanished completely. He looked like an old man at the end of his life. No matter how hard he tried to maintain it, he would definitely die within 100 years. Gu Chaoyang was stunned. He had never seen such a physiognomy in his entire life. It could actually change, changing back and forth. If I were to show it to you, won't I be ruining my Heaven's Inquisition's reputation? Gu Chaoyang shook his head. Your face is too strange. I can't understand it. I admit that I'm untalented, all right? The three of them snorted in unison. Gu Chaoyang snorted as well, tilting his head nonchalantly. He glanced at Duga Cho and Ling Xiaozui's faces, and was shocked again. Ling Xiaozui and Duga Cho's faces had turned black, looking even worse than Feng Xiang's dying face. Gu Chaoyang could not help but be shocked as he murmured to himself. What's wrong with these two? Why are there so many strange things happening today when I read their faces? Looking at the complexion of these two people, it's obvious that they've been schemed against, but I can't tell who schemed against them, or how they schemed against them. But before I went up the mountain, I specially took a look at them in order to predict the good and bad luck of this trip, and there was no such situation. If they've been tricked since the beginning, how could I not have seen it? However, if they've only been tricked now after being ambushed, yet there's clearly no outsider near them, who could it be? Gu Chaoyang suddenly shuddered at the thought. This was a terrifying situation to contemplate. Meeting in Hangzhou. Can't return until the 21st. I'm afraid I can only write one chapter these few days, and it might even be broken. There's no helping it. I can only fill it up when I get back. Chapter 669. Thinking of this, Gu Chaoyang could not help recalling the stalking plan. From the beginning to the end, it had been seamless and flawless. The idea, the plan, the beginning, the ambush, the stalking, the entire journey had been smooth sailing. Everything had been top secret. How could they have been ambushed? Furthermore, they had been ambushed after Heaven's will was shielded. This was an ambush that had been planned for a long time. Why? What was the root cause? At the very least, there was one thing that he could be sure of, and it was that the enemy knew of his existence since the beginning. The enemy knew that so long as his divination ability was present, then ordinary arrangements would be unable to be effective. So, the enemy had to conceal the workings of the heavens and interfere with his ability to make deductions in order to set up a trap and kill him. However, how had the other party been so sure of his movements? Just the precise timing of the attack was already a huge mystery. Gu Chaoyang's thoughts raced as he suddenly guffawed. Actually, everyone's physiognomy is very good. Each of them looks like they won't die even if they wanted to. He was joking, but his heart was heavy. The situation before him was definitely unusual. There had to be something amiss. Gu Chaoyang could not help recalling Duga Chao's repeated questioning of him, and the change in his aura. It looked like he was suspecting him. As for Feng Xiang, he looked generous, yet he was complaining, furious, and telling fortunes. Was he trying to push all the suspicion onto him? Then, I'll have to think about it carefully. Gu Chaoyang glanced at Ling Xiaozui, and then at Duga Chao. A relaxed smile hung on his face, but he had made up his mind. To get rid of Feng Xiang, I'll need to find an ally between these two to hope to get out of this predicament. Otherwise, even if I know that the other party is playing tricks, I won't have any evidence to expose them. It'll only backfire if I try to defend myself. Therefore, I can't act recklessly now. He thought about it and said, This hill of the Four Seasons Tower must be where the greatest secret lies. However, there's something strange. Mr. Nian, who came back with the injured patient, the two of them weren't among the 18 people. If we calculate it this way, there are 20 experts from the Four Seasons Tower who can fight Brother Ling and Brother Dugu alone. Gu Chaoyang said thoughtfully. It's even more illogical to have a lineup of 20 pinnacle experts in this world. After all, everyone's strength was about the same. Who could convince the masses? Therefore, there must be one or a few existences who have the strength to easily crush these people. Otherwise, this organization would have collapsed long ago. If that's the case, Gu Chaoyang said in a low voice, the situation doesn't look good. If Gu Chaoyang had thought of this, how could Ling Xiaozui and Duga Chou not have? They sighed softly as well. Rest for 3 days, then return at full speed. Ling Xiaozui came to a swift conclusion. No matter what, Yin Yang had to know about this as soon as possible, because according to their current strength, their lives could be in danger at any moment. If such an important piece of news could not be passed on, there would be endless troubles in the future. Tiantang City. Yin Yang was already preparing for the next step of his plan. The civil and military ministers. The civil minister Sir Bai was dead. Where was Wu Xiang? Could Wu Ying have committed suicide as well? It was the dead of the night again. A gust of wind that had not been seen for a long time quietly drifted out of the residence of King Yin and drifted away. the Empire of Yutong's most important military base, the Board of Military. It was an independent courtyard. This small courtyard was surrounded by dense pines and cypresses. They were arranged closely together and densely packed together. It was not only outside the courtyard, but even inside the courtyard was filled with cypress trees. Each of the pines and cypresses here was of a certain age, towering into the sky. The overlapping canopies of the trees covered the sky above the courtyard completely. Even when it was noon, when the sun was at its brightest, there were barely any rays of light that penetrated through. Therefore, the entire courtyard had always been eerie throughout the years. As a result, all the decisions made in this courtyard were tinged with an eerie sense of coldness. Fortunately, everyone who passed by the courtyard was a hot-blooded warrior who had been through hundreds of battles. They were all courageous people who did not mind the eerie atmosphere at all. Moreover, after years of being used to it, everyone who passed by this place immediately recognized the atmosphere as the specialty of this place. The courtyard occupied a considerable amount of land, but there was only one person working in it. It would have been a bit of a waste of resources for him to occupy this huge courtyard alone, but not a single person in the Board of Military questioned it. The reason was simple. It could even be described as crude. It was because this person was the most efficient in doing things. No one could compare to him. No matter what kind of strategy or tactic it was, as long as it was passed through the hands of the person in this courtyard, there would at least be a 30% chance of winning. One should never underestimate the 30% chance of winning. The battlefield was ever-changing, and it was rare for someone to have more than 60% chance of winning. This 30% chance of winning was often the key to turning the tide of the battle, or even securing the victory. Furthermore, the 30% chance of winning must not be forgotten. It was at least. Yes, the person in this courtyard was of such a high level. What was more, the people in this courtyard did not fight for fame or wealth. They did whatever work was available, and they were the best at whatever work they could do. If they were promoted, they would be promoted. If they were transferred, they would be transferred. They would do whatever they were told to do, and they would just work in this courtyard every single day. After so many years of silent dedication, they had finally achieved a lofty prestige that few in the Board of Military could match. Wu Ying, apart from this courtyard, his figure would not appear in any other realm. Everyone who passed by this courtyard would always look at him with fear and respect. It was as if at the end of their line of sight was the sinister and cold fellow in the courtyard, who looked like a ghost from hell. He was also looking at them with eyes that seemed to be emitting the wisps. Of course, ordinary people wouldn't be able to enter such a courtyard, but those who were qualified to enter didn't really want to. Everyone who had entered before would have the same thought. If it wasn't necessary, I don't want to pass through here again. Next time, let someone else do it. Therefore, this place was silent most of the time. Even the graveyard was not as quiet as this place. However, this night, the people in the courtyard not far away seemed to hear strange noises coming from this courtyard. It sounded like someone was letting out a strange sigh, one long and one short. It was as if they were weeping and complaining, like a group of ghosts letting out low voices. Chapter 670. Then, without warning, smoke rose from the yard, accompanied by the smell of incense and candles. There was also the smell of strong alcohol. It seemed like Sir Wu was paying his respects to someone. Everyone in the military was a veteran of the battlefield. How could they not understand what was going on when the smell of incense and wine wafted over, and the smoke curling up in spirals? Everyone was well aware of it, but another mystery arose. This was because, over the years, thousands of generals from the Board of Yutong's Board of War had perished on the battlefield. But Sir Wu Ying had never been seen paying tribute to anyone. He seemed to always be cold, as if all the emotions in the world had nothing to do with him. However, tonight, when the war had come to an end, why had the incense and candles suddenly been lit? Who was he paying his respects to? Who could make this heartless man pay his respects in such a grand manner? Everyone was curious, but no one came over to check, because no one dared to ask. They were all working in the same realm, so they were well aware of Wu Ying's temper. He would not answer even if you asked, only staring at you with his dead eyes that flickered with will-o'-the-wisp. He would not speak a word from the beginning to the end. In the end, you would only run away from his stare. You might even have nightmares at night, and not be able to sleep well for a long time. This was not a fantasy. It was a matter of experience. The sigh in the yard continued, but it was much softer. A person dressed in black was like a wandering ghost in the courtyard. His path was blocked by the candlelight in front of him. In his hand was a thin branch that was fiddling with the fire. Now you've gone too. He sighed softly, talking to himself, but it seemed like he was talking to the person in front of him. In spite of this, there was only the light of the candles in front of him. Actually, I really didn't think that you would be abandoned as well. Perhaps you did, but you didn't tell me about it. The black shadow said softly. For so many years, we've been looking at each other from afar in this city. The times we could really sit together were few and far between. You seem to have forgotten that we were once life and death brothers. You seem to have forgotten that I was the one who killed your wife and brother. All these years, I've always wanted to explain it to you, but I don't think you need it. You've never given me a chance, and you've never said that you want to take revenge on me. So, I think you should know the truth. I just can't face it. That day when you joined the Four Seasons Tower, I joined with you. It was to watch over you, to work together as brothers. Of course, be it good or bad. As long as I'm with you, it doesn't matter. Nothing matters. You were sent to Tiantang City when the world changed a long time ago, to deal with the possible changes. I told you then that the will of heaven cannot be defied. A gentleman does not stand under a collapsing wall. I thought you would understand and protect yourself. Some things that are born in response to the will of heaven are destined not to be destroyed. You stubbornly insist on going against the heavens, fighting against the heavens. I still followed you to Tiantang City. You chose to be a civil official, so of course, I had to be a military general for you, to avoid any loopholes. All these years, especially after the residents of 9 Supremes came into the world, I watched you go against the heavens, plotting against the 9 Supremes step by step, sending them into the abyss of certain death. I remember reminding you that the 9 Supremes would not perish. But you didn't believe it. You believed that man could conquer nature. But there's a limit to a man's strength. If the heavens insist on it, how can it be plotted by a man? He sighed softly. Now we've finally come to this day. You finally left. I wonder if you've understood anything before you left? You didn't contact me until the very end. You didn't want to implicate me. And you wanted to protect me? Hoping for a fluke. Wu Ying smiled faintly. I'm very happy. I'm very comforted because in your heart, I'm still your brother. It's a pity that it's useless. The other party will probably come for me tonight. The outcome now depends on whether I want to die or not. That's all there is to it. He spoke slowly in a low voice, fiddling with the thin wooden stick in his hand, fiddling with the fire and the ashes. Slowly, the flames grew smaller, turning into glowing ashes and eventually, into ashes devoid of light and heat. He was still fiddling with the ashes. He checked carefully to see if there was any bit of the paper money he had given to his brother that had not been burned. He was afraid that he would miss a single bit and make this farewell incomplete. There was nothing left. Not a single drop was left out. There was nothing left. With a flip of his hand, a large pile of paper money appeared on the ground with a clatter. He lit the fire again and began fiddling with the ashes, repeating his previous actions. The only difference from before was that he no longer spoke, doing everything in silence. The flickering light from the fire illuminated his face. In this ghost-like courtyard, he was like a ghost that wandered the mortal world coldly. After a while, he looked up and tilted his head to listen carefully, then said faintly, Lord Supreme Cloud, since you're here, why don't you come down for a chat? His eyes quietly focused on the top of a large tree in front of him to his left. There was a faint cloud of smoke lingering there, drifting to and fro. As soon as he spoke, the faint cloud of smoke moved, drifting to the spot above him. With a spin, a masked man dressed in black appeared. The 9 Supreme Cloud had arrived at the right time. Wooing watched as the black silhouette beside him materialized from nothing and gradually coalesced into a human form. His eyes that were like willow, the wisp were completely unruffled, much colder than the usual chilling gaze. Despite the eerie atmosphere, Wooing was still composed and said hoarsely, "Lord Supreme Cloud comes and goes like a shadow indeed. If it weren't for my premonition, I'm afraid I wouldn't have been able to catch the minute oddities and notice your arrival." Yin Yang snorted and said faintly, "Wooing, do you know that I've always admired you? No, it would be more appropriate to say that I respect you. If the truth wasn't right before my eyes, I wouldn't have thought that the other spy hiding in the deepest recesses of Yutong would be you. When I was certain, I even hoped that my judgment was wrong, that the so-called truth was a trap set up by the enemy to confuse me. However, the truth is the truth. No matter how reluctant I was to believe it, I couldn't not believe it." Wooing chuckled bitterly and said, "Lord Supreme Cloud, what you've said has revealed half of what I wanted to say." "Oh?" Yin Yang asked. Wooing chuckled softly, his voice even more ethereal as he said, "In the entire empire of Yutong, the people I respect, admire, and like the most are the 9 Supremes, the 9 of you. Furthermore, among the 9 of you, the one I value and respect the most is you, Lord Supreme Cloud." Chapter 671. Yin Yang chuckled mockingly. "Sending us to hell because you like us? Are you going to say that because you like us too much, but are destined to never have us, you might as well destroy us?" Wooing replied seriously, "Not so. This lowly official's thoughts and actions are despicable and despicable, but there are still some things that I can distinguish. The 9 Supremes Lords have fought the world with all their might for the people of Yutong, bathed in blood on the battlefield. You are the best men in the world. I respect all of you from the bottom of my heart. This has long been decided, there is no doubt about it. In the battle of the east of the river back then, all of you came to our aid from thousands of miles away, fighting for 4 days and nights, and finally repelling the enemy. Because of that, you saved 300,000 Yutong citizens, preventing them from being trampled by the enemy. My people were among them," Wooing said in a low voice. "For this alone I, Wooing, see the 9 Supremes Lords as my benefactors. Now that I've finally met my benefactor, please allow me to bow to you." Finishing his words, he lifted his robe and knelt on the ground, giving Yin Yang a few kowtows. Yin Yang was speechless. For a moment, he was a little dumbfounded, not knowing what to do or how to phrase his words. Yin Yang had thought of countless ways to start the conversation, but he had never thought of the situation before him. Everyone was hostile to each other, and it was hard to turn things around. It was reasonable for them to say a few words of flattery to each other, and it could even help to raise their statuses. But what was up with you kneeling down and kowtowing so openly? Isn't this too much? Yin Yang was not the only one who was dumbfounded, but Wooing was serious and solemn. After he had kowtowed 3 times, he stood up and said in a low voice, "My lord, you don't have to think that my actions are strange. I, Wooing, am from Yutong after all, a true Yutong citizen. When it comes to the rights and wrongs of the nation and its people, I'm still very clear." Yin Yang still did not know what to say. "Clear? Are you really clear? If you are, why are you still the mastermind to frame the Empire's guardian? You almost caused the Empire to collapse, and almost caused the extinction of the nation. Is this what you call being clear about the big picture?" Wooing said calmly, "I can imagine what you're thinking right now, sir. There's no need to elaborate on the so-called great principles. Actually, everyone, be it good or bad, understands those great principles. However, when faced with certain things, there will always be people who make different choices. Different choices will, of course, result in different outcomes." He lifted his head, his eyes gleaming with willow, the wisps as he looked at Yin Yang. Many people choose to be righteous for the sake of loyalty, choosing to serve the country with unwavering loyalty. Such people are, of course, worthy of respect. However, there are also those who choose to be self-reliant, choosing to achieve their personal goals, choosing to have a family, choosing friendships, brothers, and so on, or even choosing to live on. You can despise and even despise such people and their choices, but their choices have their standpoints as well. It's really just a difference of standpoints. What I have let down the 9 Supremes Lords is a momentary lapse in judgment. When faced with such a choice, although I knew which choice was the most benevolent one, I still chose the narrow-minded side, the selfish side. That's all. Yin Yang could not help smirking. It's rare for you to speak of the crime of treason in such a dignified manner. A momentary lapse in judgment? Because of your momentary lapse in judgment, millions of brothers have died in the battlefield because of your choices. Millions of elders and elders have been forced to wander from place to place, trapped between life and death, because of your choices. Yet you can still speak so confidently, and with a clear conscience. Isn't it a wonder? Wu Ying said. Confidently and with a clear conscience? Lord Supreme Cloud, you think too highly of me. Perhaps I can speak so confidently, but I dare not claim to have a clear conscience. However, ever since I've been appointed, I've done everything flawlessly, wholeheartedly for Yutong, for the Empire, for the world, for the people. I've exhausted myself and given my all, fearing that I might make the slightest mistake. I've done my duty as a citizen of Yutong. All these years, all the public affairs that have passed through my hands have always been perfect. Not a single one of them has ever been flawed. Does Lord Supreme Cloud really think that I'm only doing this to conceal my identity? I really want to do my duty as a citizen of Yutong, to do my part for the Empire of Yutong. This is what I should do, and it's also a little compensation from me, he said faintly. I think that my many years of planning and strategies, my many years of hard work, should be enough to save millions of people, or perhaps millions of comrades who should have died long ago. Of course, I know that murdering the 9 Supremes will result in unimaginable consequences, but I won't regret it once I've made my choice. I'll use my own way to make up for it. I dare even say that if I hadn't been coordinating and strategizing all these years, the Empire of Yutong might not have survived until the 9 Supremes' arrival. Do you believe it or not, Lord Supreme Cloud? Yin Yang laughed in spite of his anger. So what if I believe it? So what if it's the truth? In your own words, what you've done is your duty as a citizen to Yutong, and to the Imperial Court of Yutong. It's your duty. As a citizen of Yutong, since you've received your salary, you should work for the people and contribute to the nation, be it for public or private reasons. How can you offer it as compensation? Wu Ying said calmly. Lord Supreme Cloud's argument is suitable for most of Yutong's citizens. To them, it's indeed impossible. Once they've done something, it's an unpardonable crime. However, I shouldn't belong to this category. After all, there are too many people who receive the same salary and rations as I do. Looking at the entire Yutong military, who would dare say that they've done better than me, even if old Marshal Chiu, old Grand Commandant Fong, and the others were here? I'd still dare to say this. Yin Yang chuckled and said, even if I want to deny Marshal Wu's words, I can't. After all, I can't erase my conscience and speak irresponsibly. Therefore, Marshal Wu is truly remarkable. However, according to your logic, I can't help but think that no one in this world can do better than me in certain aspects. Then does that mean that I can do whatever I want and destroy the world? Wu Ying said quietly. It looks like Lord Supreme Cloud's perception of my argument is a little biased. I can only say that Lord Supreme Cloud can't agree with a lowly person like me. My reason is nothing but an excuse at the end of the day. I need to find a proper excuse to temporarily deceive myself. Otherwise, the torment in my heart alone is enough to make me unable to continue. With this excuse, at least I can feel that I still have a reason to continue despite what I've done. After all, I've done more good than harm to Yutong. It's better than nothing. This is my illusion, but it's Yutong's reality. Wu Ying said. Don't you agree, Lord Supreme Cloud? Chapter 672. Yin Yang kept quiet for a bit and said, Marshal Wu, I don't really know how to comment on you anymore. What do you think you are? A true villain who deceives himself and others? Wu Ying said casually, I am indeed deceiving myself and others, and I am indeed a true villain. But at the same time, I am a powerful and capable true villain. My ability, at least for a long time, can't be replaced by anyone. Murderous intent flickered in Yun Yang's eyes. Do you know that no matter how irreplaceable a person is, once he dies, he's still a dead man? Even if his death will cause considerable turmoil, he won't exist in this world after all. This world, on the other hand, won't change at all. Wu Ying said, Lord Supreme Cloud is determined to kill me. I've guessed this a long time ago. From the beginning to the end, he had never addressed himself as this official, this general, this lowly official, or this reputed one. He had only addressed himself as I. It was obvious that he no longer saw himself as a Yutong official, or a military marshal. Yun Yang was well aware of this, but he had still addressed himself as Marshal Wu. After all, Wu Ying had indeed put in a lot of effort for Yutong all these years. The stability of Yutong's territory was largely due to this man. Even though their stances were clear now, this man's contributions could not be erased. Bai Zhongliu is already dead, Wu Ying said leisurely. Back then, he had always said that his ability could bring peace to the nation and the world. Even when the nation was in danger, and the country was on the verge of collapse, as long as he was given a chance, he could stabilize the nation. Therefore, he named himself Bai Zhongliu. Yin Yang said, Oh, I wonder if he can still be called Bai Zhongliu when he goes to the netherworld? Yin Yang's tone was as calm as ever, but he was actually shocked. Bai Zhongliu, this name was very familiar. Many years ago, there had been a shocking case. The key person involved in it was a person called Bai Zhongliu. Yin Yang wondered if this Bai Zhongliu was this person. Wu Ying ignored the hidden mockery in his words and continued. Lord Supreme Cloud didn't attack right away. I guess you still have something you want to know? Why don't you explain it to Lord Supreme Cloud while I'm in the mood? He sighed faintly and said, Sir, do you know that all the words I've spoken in the past 20 years cannot be compared to what I've said today? Yun Yang's gaze was sharp as he said, I've long heard of Marshal Wu's reputation for being concise and direct. His words are the law when it comes to military affairs. His orders and prohibitions are executed without the slightest bias. However, he spoke so confidently and with assurance today. Perhaps it's because after today, there won't be any more opportunities to speak. Wu Ying could not help but chuckle. Of course, Lord Supreme Cloud is powerful, of course. He has the power to kill and rarely fails. However, he has underestimated me. I know that even if I can't kill Lord Supreme Cloud, much less be your opponent, I'm still quite confident that I can escape unscathed from Lord Supreme Cloud's clutches. It's just that Bai Zhongliu didn't get to see you before he died. To him, it was a great regret. I have to help him fulfill this wish. Yin Yang said. If that's the case, there's no need to waste words. I believe Marshal Wu knows what I want to know. Just tell me what you know. Why should I be the one asking? Wu Ying chuckled hoarsely and said, Sir, you're right, but I have to say the whole story first. It looks like this conversation will take a long time. Would Lord Supreme Cloud like to have a cup of tea with me? It was easy to deceive others, but difficult to deceive oneself. Wu Ying had long been stubborn about what he had done. Even now, he was saying that he had committed a grave mistake, but he did not take his sins too seriously. If it were not for Bai Zhongliu's matter and his desire to escape, his determination and stubbornness were actually the most unique among all the people from the Four Seasons Tower that Yin Yang had targeted. Before his words echoed in the air, without waiting for Yin Yang to speak, he shook his wrist, and a table, chair, and tea set appeared on the ground. They were neatly arranged, and there was even a long-lit candle on the tea table. A formless mystical chi engulfed the space abruptly. The wind howled, but the flame of the candle did not waver. Lord Supreme Cloud, please take a seat. Wu Ying picked up the teapot and said with a smile, There's a saying that goes, 3 goblets of wine in the worldly affairs, a pot of tea for 1,000 years' cause. Everyone thinks that this saying is very imposing, and there are countless interpretations, but I have a different understanding. Yin Yang sat down and said, Oh, may I ask what Marshal Wu thinks about this? Yin Yang asked. Wu Ying said, I think that this saying 3 goblets of wine in the worldly affairs means that anyone who has gone through this worldly affairs, 3 goblets of wine can be used as a tribute to him. As for a pot of tea for 1,000 years' cause, It basically means that no matter how great a feat a person has done, no matter how meritorious he is, when the descendants talk about him after his death, they can talk about it clearly in the time of a pot of tea. Wu Ying shook his head and said faintly, just like how we're going to talk about Bai Zhongliu's life now. No matter how deep his thoughts are, how brilliant his schemes are, how meticulous his calculations are, how intelligent he is, how a fourth-grade civil minister, a martial world powerhouse, who can control the world, it's still a pot of tea. He lifted his head to look at Yun Yang. A pot of tea is enough for you to know everything about his life from my mouth. Wu Ying chuckled and spilled the tea on the ground, saying softly, so brother, this is your 1,000-year cause. Yun Yang felt an indescribable sense of absurdity wash over him. It was the first time he had heard someone interpret these two lines in such a manner. In spite of this, he had to admit that it seemed to be a little twisted. After all, twisted logic had to be justified before it could be used as an argument. Bai Zhongliu and I were childhood friends. Not only were we childhood sweethearts, we were also sworn brothers. We studied together when we were young. We studied under the same teacher in martial arts. He was older than me, so I called him elder brother. We've supported each other for so many years, but I've benefited more from him. That year, he was determined to serve the country and fulfill his ambition. With the title of Tiannan's top scholar, he entered the capital for the imperial examination. Before he left, I, who had failed, sent him off. He said, if he could gain the favor of a wise ruler, he would soar to the heavens and dance in the winds and clouds. He would command the 4 seas and 8 wastelands. He would rule the world without betrayal. He did it. With his well-known literary name, he was recognized by a high official the moment he entered the capital, who betrothed his beloved daughter to him. He even became the top scholar in the imperial examination, his limelight unparalleled. However, just as he was proud of his life and his career was about to take off, he was framed without warning and was involved in a case of rebellion. What surprised him even more was that the person who framed him was his new wife. His career was severed from then on. His wife was originally, Sai, let's not talk about this anymore. After I found out that something had happened to him, I naturally couldn't just sit back and watch. I killed his father-in-law's family and another high official involved in the case. Then I snuck into the prison and rescued him. At that time, he was devastated by what had happened. He only had love as his anchor, blinding his heart. His wife was the only one in his heart. Yet when I killed him, his wife was already 7 months pregnant. Wu Ying said slowly as he brewed tea, we're brothers. No matter how sorrowful he was, he wouldn't have doubted my words. However, his own younger brother was beside him, accusing me of being the culprit who framed him, saying that I'd been dissatisfied with his wife for a long time. At that time, I was furious, really furious, so I stormed out. After that, I accidentally found out that his younger brother was one of the people who framed him. I was so furious that I killed him in the middle of the night. However, just as I was about to cut off his head, Bai Zhongliu appeared at the door. I don't know if it was a coincidence or not. Wu Ying sighed softly. No matter how hard I tried to explain, it didn't help. From then on, we didn't see each other again. Yun Yang sighed as he listened. He had killed someone else's pregnant wife, and his own younger brother right in front of him. They still didn't see each other again, but they didn't turn into enemies. The grudge and the relationship between them were truly indescribable. Wu Ying narrated the past grudges and feelings in a very simple manner, recounting everything in one breath. In spite of this, Yun Yang could imagine the process in his mind, how terrifying it must have been. With Sir Bai's intelligence and resourcefulness, what level of scheme must it have been to have been set up to this point? Thinking back to Wu Ying's seamless and flawless way of handling things, Sir Bai, the only person who should not have met him, had actually seen through his murder. What kind of scheme was hidden within? Everything was illogical. Or it could be said that the more one thought about it, the more terrifying it would be. However, Yun Yang had heard of the case back then, and had even read through the case files. However, it had been a long time and many of the files were missing. They had long become unsolvable mysteries that could no longer be cleared up. Wu Ying, who was standing before him, was obviously an insider of the old case back then. He might even be a person involved in it, but he had only spoken about it briefly now. It was difficult for him to explain more. Yun Yang could also tell that he did not want to talk about the case back then at all. He only wanted to talk about Bai Zhongliu's life, so he could not skip this part. Actually, I know that Bai Zhongliu knows everything. He just doesn't want to face the truth, especially after I killed these people. That's all. Perhaps to him, not facing it is also a way to face it. The two of us, he didn't really want to cut ties with me. Not interacting with me doesn't mean that we're strangers. He's been watching me all these years and I've been watching him too. If he really wanted to cut ties with me, why would he still be watching me? Chapter 673. We're a pair of brothers who have gone through life and death together. I believe Lord Supreme Cloud can still understand this, said Wu Ying. Yes, I understand. Yin Yang sighed. It was no wonder that everyone knew Sir Bai, but no one knew what his real name was. This was because the name Bai Zhongliu was a taboo name that could never appear. Therefore, Sir Bai was only the Crown Prince's aide. The chief aide was still just an aide. He had never actually entered the officialdom. Later on, Bai Zhongliu joined the Four Seasons Tower for some unknown reason. Wu Ying said faintly, I was cultivating the deadly Yin poison physique then and had some success, but I've always felt guilty towards him, so I followed him and joined the Four Seasons Tower. A few years later, he was sent to Tiantang City first. Not long after that, I arrived in Tiantang City as well. Then we looked at each other from afar for a very, very long time. He chose to work as an aide for Yutong's royalty, while I became a member of the military. We never met again, but since then, the Four Seasons Tower had a legend of a civil and military leader. Wu Ying poured another cup of tea onto the ground lightly. He sighed softly. Based on the way he did things, Bai Zhongliu's temperament had changed after the incident back then. However, I don't care about this change. No matter how much he has changed, he's still him. He's still my brother, Bai Zhongliu. Even if he chose to go against the Nine Supremes, I'll still stand by his side and assist him as best I can. So what if my conscience is uneasy? We're brothers in this lifetime. If he wants to go to hell, of course, I'll go with him. Wu Ying said faintly, his tone carefree and joyful. I knew it was wrong. I knew it was a grave sin. I felt guilty. However, I did it and I followed him. I have no regrets. Yin Yang sighed again. Faced with such a person, he once again felt that he had nothing to say and nothing to refute him. He could distinguish right from wrong, good from evil, but he persisted in doing bad things. Actually, I did remind him that day. I told him that since the Nine Heavens domain had descended upon Yutong, it was Heaven's will that was protecting them. Then, it was destined that it would be impossible to eradicate the Nine Supremes. Heaven's will wouldn't allow it. But he didn't reply. He was determined to go against the Heavens. Then I will follow him and defy the Heavens. Therefore, I began to obliterate all the relevant evidence behind him. Every trace, every drop. Everything was obliterated. I believe you have a rough idea of the details regarding the ambush of the Nine Supremes. The last thing I can add to this matter is that the entire setup originated from the information I provided and the opportunity one created. Then, it was Bai Zhongliu who laid out the plan and meticulously laid out the ambush. Then, he used some people to slowly spread the news to Spring Frost. These are the minor details. Our cooperation has already completed half of the entire setup. Reality has proven that man can triumph over nature. Wu Ying went on, describing the entire setup in detail with an almost boastful tone. Yin Yang was comparing them one by one. After all, the amount of information he had received regarding the Four Seasons Tower during this period of time was too much. He had to sort them out one by one, from the Crown Prince, Sir Bai, to Venerable Lord Ice, Yang Buotao, Supreme Lord Spring Frost, and so on. Yin Yang heaved a long sigh in his heart. How was this a plan? It was countless threads that were all mixed together to form an inescapable net against the Nine Supremes. The goal was to force the Nine Supremes to Tianxian Cliff. Each link was closely linked to the next, one step closer to the next. Everything was linked and seamless. Yun Yang's back was drenched in cold sweat as he listened. The Nine Supremes think tank felt that his brain was inadequate for the first time after listening to such a plan. Even if he were to start all over again, he and his brothers might not be able to escape. The people they had used in the entire setup were mostly clueless. There were many of them who did not know anything at all. Some of them were loyal to Yutong and the Nine Supremes. They had only become a small part of the entire scheme, because they had passed on some information. Usually, it would take 3 or 4 pieces of information to piece together, to form a relatively complete piece of information. Who would have thought that there would be ulterior motives in this? What did it mean to send a military warfare officer to do? What did it mean to have someone on the other side do? What did it mean to have someone on the other side? What did it mean to have done? Then, the other side would gather and form a chain of information. It was so complicated and noisy that it was simply unimaginable. It was no wonder that he had only managed to find out that Supreme Lord Spring Frost was the mastermind behind Tiantang City. None of these pieces of information could be traced back to Sir Bai and Wu Ying. Even when Yun Yang knew everything now, knowing that all of this was done to go against him and the Nine Supremes, he still felt that such a plan was a masterpiece that could not be replicated. It was a heaven-defying plan indeed, capable of doing what others could not. What an unparalleled talent. Yun Yang sighed softly and said, "You are a beauty, but why did you become a thief?" Wu Ying replied faintly, "How can one become a thief if one is not capable? How can those mediocre people be qualified to be thieves?" Yun Yang said, "By Zhongliu's bizarre death a few days ago, was it due to some mysterious seal? Like Supreme Lord Spring Frost's seal back then?" Wu Ying said, "Who in the Four Seasons Tower doesn't have a seal on them? Including Mr. Nian, whom you all know. Does he not have a seal on him?" Heh. Yun Yang felt a jolt in his heart when he heard the question. Isn't Mr. Nian the Four Seasons Tower's supreme leader? Why would he have a seal on him as well? Wu Ying said, "Mr. Nian is indeed the Four Seasons Tower's supreme leader, but there's only one Mr. Nian without a seal on him. As for the other Mr. Nians, I don't know how many there are." Yun Yang mused, "I see. So this is the truth about Mr. Nian. If that's the case, doesn't it mean that you have a seal on you as well?" Wu Ying sneered, "I did have a seal on me too. The Four Seasons Tower's seal on the higher-ups is unique. It's rooted in one's cultivation method. Once the seal is triggered, 80% of the cultivation method that one has cultivated for their entire life will be lost. Which cultivator would be willing to give up the cultivation method that they have cultivated diligently for their entire life? However, I already had a plan when I first joined the Four Seasons Tower. When I arrived at Tiantang City, I immediately abolished the poison physique that I cultivated and switched to Bright Saint Sutra. The so-called cultivation method seal has long since ceased to exist for me. This is also the main reason why I haven't stepped out of this yard for decades." Wu Ying looked around the yard in a daze and said sadly, "I've racked my brains and plotted for such a long time, but it's all in vain. Bai Zhongliu is still dead." Speaking of this, Wu Ying heaved a long sigh and stood in a daze. After a long time, 2 drops of tears fell from his eyes as he said sadly, "He's still dead after all." IO7. The king of web literature had a meeting until past 10 o'clock today. I didn't expect to write until now. I'm extremely tired. I still have a meeting on the 20th, as well as activities. I might as well take a day off. IO9. Chapter 674. Yun Yang was deep in thought, obviously digesting everything Wu Ying had said. The inside story was not small indeed. The Four Seasons Tower's foundation was still strong, but what was revealed was only the tip of the iceberg. Yun Yang had thought of similar things, and had experienced it more than once or twice. Although he was still not used to it, and did not like it, it was the truth after all. He had no choice but to face it positively. However, the outcome was still acceptable for the time being. It could be said that it was rather gratifying, because it could be confirmed that other than Wu Ying who stood before him, and the traitorous venerable sword, Snow and Frost, there were no more spies from the Four Seasons Tower in Tiantang City, or even the entire empire of Yutong. In other words, the internal threat that the Four Seasons Tower had created in Yutong had been completely quelled. Of course, this did not apply to His Highness the Crown Prince and the unfortunate third and fourth princes. That was because these three fellows were actually all involved in this huge conspiracy. At that moment, Yunyang suddenly did not want to keep a whetstone for Bauer anymore. His mind was filled with the thought of killing these three bastards one by one to vent the hatred in his heart. Although Wu Ying was the biggest culprit behind the ambush of the Nine Supremes in Tianxian Mountain, Yunyang's vengeance would not cause much of a ripple with the man's temperament. He would not even feel the thrill of revenge. A man like him who was like a walking corpse was already indifferent to life and death, and had no desires. Even if he were to be tortured to death and tortured to death, what could he do? Thinking of this, Yunyang could not help feeling dejected and uncomfortable. Forget it. There were still the three princes he could target, and Mr. Nian from the Four Seasons Tower. They would not have such a state of mind, would they? There was still a way to settle this score. No matter how many schemes you have devised, even if you have made a wrong move, Bai Zhongliu is still dead. Yunyang said faintly. Actually, from what I can see, it's impossible for him not to die. Since he has done such a thing, this outcome is only a matter of time. Even if the Four Seasons Tower's higher-ups didn't decide to take his life and take away his vitality, or if he was unwilling to die, would I have let him go? That day, I had already decided to kill him. If he hadn't died, I would have killed him. Therefore, he had to die no matter what. There can only be one result. A ghostly fire flashed in Wu Ying's eyes as he said eerily, "Looks like the heavens have indeed blessed Lord Supreme Cloud. He didn't die in your hands after all. It's a blessing for both you and him." Yunyang smiled, a sharp glint flashing across his eyes as he said faintly, "That's right. He should feel fortunate that he didn't die in my hands. If he had died in my hands, he wouldn't have died so easily." Wu Ying's words carried a hidden meaning, but he did not understand it. However, Yunyang did not conceal his words at all. It was a direct confrontation between the two armies with swords drawn. Wu Ying turned his head abruptly. His willow. The wisp eyes suddenly turned as sharp as the edge of a blade as they focused on Yunyang's face. He uttered word by word, "Lord Supreme Cloud, do you mean to torture and seek revenge? Or perhaps, Lord Supreme Cloud is actually very disappointed that he didn't torture Bai Zhongliu?" Yunyang replied calmly, "With the intelligence system that you possess, you should know that torturing people like you who commit treason, murder the loyal, and ruin the empire is the most enjoyable thing in my life." Ha ha ha. What a delightful thing. Wu Ying guffawed, but his voice and expression were as cold as a snowy mountain. Yunyang's gaze slowly turned cold and sharp as he said faintly, "Marshal Wu, you've said so much. Do you have anything else to add?" Wu Ying sucked in a deep breath as if he was about to explode, but he swallowed it abruptly and said, "Yes." Yunyang said faintly, "Then please continue, Marshal Wu." Wu Ying said slowly, "I'm not your prisoner. You don't have to use an interrogating tone to talk to me." Yunyang replied coldly, "I thought that my words were polite enough. Marshal Wu, do you still find it displeasing to your ears?" In spite of this, some words that were left unsaid would only become Marshal Wu's lifelong regret. Otherwise, I'm afraid it would be difficult for me to see Marshal Wu here. Isn't that so? Wu Ying snorted and said, "But is this how Lord Supreme Cloud treats those who sincerely provide you with intelligence?" Yunyang replied faintly, "Marshal Wu's words are rather uncouth. Now that we know each other, whether I ask or not, Marshal Wu will still speak. Do you think that Marshal Wu won't speak if I humiliate Marshal Wu?" Wu Ying suddenly guffawed, almost tearing up from his laughter. "Lord Supreme Cloud is indeed Lord Supreme Cloud. I'm impressed. Forget it. Since you've said that we know each other, there's no need to say more. I've waited for Lord Supreme Cloud to come tonight mainly to ask for a favor from you," said Wu Ying. Marshal Wu wants to live a little longer, right?" Yunyang said. Marshal Wu was indignant that he couldn't save Bai Zhongliu from death in time, so he wanted to live to witness the Four Seasons Tower's downfall on his behalf. With your eyes, you completed Bai Zhongliu's lifelong regret. Am I right? Yes, answered Wu Ying. Yun Yang was silent for a moment, feeling his emotions rising and falling. His eyes unconsciously turned towards the dark sky that was already covered by the thick shade of the tree leaves. He did not speak for a long time. After a while, he said softly, "The Four Seasons Tower was originally united. No one has ever been able to divide and incite rebellion. What I want to know the most now is why were you all so loyal to the Four Seasons Tower? Other than that, what is the reason for your rebellious thoughts now?" He avoided the topic and went straight to the next topic. Wu Ying was not the least bit surprised. Hearing Yin Yang's question, Wu Ying said, "There's a saying among the Four Seasons Tower's higher-ups. Come to the tower if you wish for immortality." "If it's just the word immortality, I'm afraid it's not enough," said Yin Yang indifferently. "Death is inevitable. The Four Seasons Tower has a soul." Wu Ying said, "Even if a person is already dead, the Four Seasons Tower can still give him another chance at life." Yin Yang was quiet. He thought about it and said, "If this is all, it's still not enough. At least, it's hard for the pinnacle of this world to be moved. After the 9th transformation, one can live a carefree life," said Wu Ying. Yin Yang was taken aback and asked in surprise, "What do you mean?" "The Four Seasons Tower's 9 revolutions truly means that as long as one has enough merit points, one can go to the Pavilion of 9 Revolutions to choose a godly art, an immortal golden pill, and a pill of heaven's path." Wu Ying said, "As long as you consume the divine pill of heavenly way, you will be able to elevate your divine skill to the realm of initial mastery. The effect is unimaginably great. Once you've stabilized your current realm, or even taken a step further, you can consume the immortal golden pill. With the help of the pill, you will be able to cultivate this cultivation method to the realm of mastery. Once you've completed the cultivation of this cultivation method, even if you can't transcend mortality and enter sainthood, and become a deity, you will still be able to live freely for tens of thousands of years in this world. Your cultivation base will also be invincible except for a select few. What's more, when the time comes, those whose cultivation base is accomplished can even remove all the seals on them. By then, if you wish to live a carefree life, the Four Seasons Tower will provide you with the title of a foreign elder. You can do as you please. Compared to the removal of the restriction, the benefits won't be reduced. If you haven't used the fatal disaster that belongs to you by then, you can still enjoy the authority of the fatal disaster and the soul of the Four Seasons. It's fine even if it's passed on to a third party. All of this is witnessed by heaven's oath. Even the master of the Four Seasons Tower can't go against it." Yun Yang was hit with a sudden realization. "I see. Joining the Four Seasons Tower, not only will one have the support of an invincible force, they'll also have the hope of immortality in front of them, not to mention the guarantee of immortality and the chance to finally leave the Four Seasons Tower and become truly free." Faced with such benefits, even the pinnacle of this world will find it hard to resist. No wonder, no wonder. Yin Yang was deep in thought. He had to admit that the Four Seasons Tower's offer was unparalleled in the entire world. In this world, anyone who had money, power, and ambition would all want to live a long life. They would all want to die but not die. They would all want to be the pinnacle of this world. They would all want to live a carefree life for 10,000 years. These were the 4 major weaknesses of human nature. Moreover, such generous terms were guaranteed. Under heaven's oath, no one dared to go against it. No one could. The Four Seasons Tower is impressive indeed. What a generous offer. Yun Yang sighed and said, "But like Marshal Wu said, such benefits can only be enjoyed by those who have reached the highest realm. How could there be such a loophole in the Four Seasons Tower's arrangement? Don't you know, Lord Supreme Cloud, that not only will no one who is qualified to join the Four Seasons Tower be inferior, no one will even think that they are inferior to others? What others can do, they will never think that they can't do it, but that they can do it better." Wu Ying sneered. "Until now, there are still so many people who are willing to go through fire and water in the Four Seasons Tower, without any second thoughts. Since there are so many benefits, I really can't think of why all of you would have second thoughts. You are like that, and so is the deceased by Zhongliu. Could there be some unforeseen event that has caused you to have other thoughts? Yun Yang acutely noticed a key point. Initially, with the heavenly oath as a guarantee, everyone would be at ease. However, after the battle at Tianxian Cliff that day, to be more precise, after Lord Supreme Cloud launched his revenge, we gradually realized that something was amiss. Wu Ying said in a low voice. Oh, Yun Yang seemed to have grasped the crux of the matter, but he needed Wu Ying's confirmation. For so many years, it has been too long since anyone dared to set their sights on the Four Seasons path. The last time someone threatened the Four Seasons Tower was Ling Xiaozue. Until now, there is really nothing in this world that can pose a threat to the Four Seasons Tower. However, since Lord Supreme Cloud launched his revenge, many of the Four Seasons Tower's higher-ups, including Supreme Lord Spring Frost and the two venerable lords, didn't come back to life. It was still fine at the beginning. If it was only 1, 2, or 3 of them, perhaps their chances of survival had long been used up. Naturally, they wouldn't be able to survive. However, as long as one is suspicious, no matter how perfect the disguise is, as long as one is patient, one can eventually find something suspicious. For example, the seal on us. As a result, Lord Supreme Cloud's step-by-step revenge has been flawless and meticulous. But until now, no one has been able to find out where Lord Supreme Cloud really is, or who his real identity is. However, has Lord Supreme Cloud noticed, or rather suspected, that the exposure of many of the Four Seasons Tower's people is akin to sending themselves to your doorstep to be killed by you? The process of your revenge can be said to be fraught with difficulties. But if one were to look into it, it can hardly be smooth. I don't believe that Lord Supreme Cloud didn't feel this at all. If you really didn't, then the name of the Nine Supremes think tank is undeserving. The Willow, the Wisp in Wu Ying's eyes flickered. Yun Yang was struck by a thought and said, I do have this feeling too, but why? Wu Ying said, Sai, this is what I don't understand as well. So many people have died for no reason. The higher-ups have been clamoring to track down Supreme Cloud every day, to get to the bottom of it. But there hasn't been any major action. Why is this so? Is it just to let so many people die in vain after alerting the enemy? Wu Ying said, That's why I can't die. I have to know what all of this is for. I want to see the Four Seasons Tower fall. I want to live a little longer. However, Lord Supreme Cloud has found me. He can't let me go just like that, no matter what. If I want to stay here, I have to get Lord Supreme Cloud's approval. Wu Ying said honestly, his tone unperturbed. Yun Yang said quietly, Before I came here, the world is vast. You can roam freely. You can go wherever you want and live. Wu Ying said faintly, But I still want to stay in Yutong's board of military and continue doing my own thing. Only by staying here can my heart be at peace. Yun Yang lifted his head to look at him. Wu Ying said faintly, I've completed the Four Seasons Tower's mission. The only brother who could touch my heart has died as well. Before I die, during these days where I'm waiting for the results, I only want to live as a citizen of Yutong or an official of Yutong. Therefore, I wish to continue doing things for my country. That's all. If Lord Supreme Cloud doesn't agree, then I can try my best to escape and hide far away in the martial world. I believe that I can escape. He looked at Yun Yang calmly and said, Now, I only owe Lord Supreme Cloud a word. May I ask what you think of it? Yun Yang squinted, looking at the culprit who was speaking confidently in front of him. His state of mind was unprecedentedly conflicted. He could feel the sincerity in every word that Wu Ying was saying. There was not a single lie in his words. Wu Ying was indeed a capable person. It could even be said that no one in the entire Yutong military could match his ability, let alone replace it. What he said about wanting to do things for the country was sincere as well. However, can I not avenge so many of my brothers? In addition, what Wu Ying had said was also what Yun Yang had been thinking about for a long time. The Four Seasons Tower's influence in the secular world had been destroyed by him one after another. It seemed difficult, but everything had been strangely smooth. What was all this for? Yun Yang thought that there must be a reason behind it, but now that he thought about it, there was no reason at all. 4,000 words today 2 in 1. He could not continue writing until this point. Should he kill Wu Ying? Should he die? Let's discuss this. Today is the birthday of our chief Ronger of the Feng family. Let us wish her a happy birthday, forever young and beautiful. Chief Ronger has been following Supreme Lord ever since he opened his books. She has never left through the ups and downs. She has stayed up all night reviewing books, paying attention to analysis, uniting readers. She has done so much for the Feng family. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.